The end of the world has come. The dead are crawling among people. At the very beginning, the attributes will be distributed randomly, and it is possible that nothing will fall out. But then you'll come across treasure chests and red envelopes that can be used on existing chests. Powerful skills also lie ahead. Killer weapons will be available as rewards. To reach the level of a king, you need to destroy demons coming from all directions. Destroy them and get the desired prize. But you should be prepared for an endless stream of creatures. Destroyed everyone and had a great time. You showed what you're worth. Today you command me. Tomorrow you will crawl on your knees before me. Those who are kind will be rewarded. Those who mock will be destroyed. The laws and order of this world will be determined by the hero. The end of the world has happened. A sudden virus has swept the entire world. In just 3 days, the world became a prison for humanity. A disgruntled male voice asked why the fat man had so little food supply. And then he stated that there wasn't even water here. James Garden reported that his ill-wishers devoured all the supplies, leaving not a crumb. When the end of the world came, the guy, out of his kindness, let 3 fools into the dorm, and now he was paying the price. The hero began to beg the offender to let him go, promising to go to another place. But then Timothy's friend found a photograph of his teacher, Lillian Hudson, that had fallen out of the fat man's pocket. Staring at her, the man said that he got an erection just from the sight of the girl. After kicking James, the scoundrel said that a fat man shouldn't be pining over such a beauty. The hero immediately understood the intentions of the uninvited guest. The next second, the idiot urinated on the beauty's photograph. James, who tried to protect a photograph of his lover, was kicked in the face. An angry Timothy said that the dorm superintendent was just wasting his time here. When the hero was thrown out into the street, he shouted that the whole Trinity would go to hell. Lying on the ground, the young man heard 3 idiots laughing at what had happened behind the door. And a few days ago, he lived peacefully and only received reprimands for the electrical wiring. And this life was only spoiled by the dormitory's commandant, Teresa Rhodes, who loved to cause trouble for her subordinate. No sooner had the guy solved the wiring problem than the girl started nagging him again that day. Among other things, the hero was in love with Lillian Hudson, who sometimes took care of him. Her concern made the young man feel warmth in his soul. But now he has lost everything. James noticed the zombie and knew that if he was discovered, it would be the end for him. But his legs wouldn't obey, and the guy couldn't move. However, it was already too late. The monster noticed the victim and rushed towards it with a terrible roar. With his last bit of strength, the protagonist tried to move, but nothing worked. A thought flashed through his head: is he really going to die here? It was at that moment that James saw his salvation. The young man grabbed the broom, swung it, and attacked with a scream. There was hope that death could be avoided. A creepy scream from a zombie, and then strange objects appeared in front of him. James stared at the unknown objects in surprise. A sign appeared in front of the guy with a congratulatory message and a notification about receiving the characteristic system. He also received the attributes of strength, +1, speed, 2, and intelligence, 0.3. The young man sank to the ground in surprise and began to stare at the virtual table. And then it dawned on him that he would not die today. However, the joy suddenly disappeared as another zombie appeared on the horizon. The guy jumped up and ran away, telling the dead man not to come closer. The fat man linked the appearance of strength in his legs to those glowing things. The glows that appeared on the corpses were stat points, and apparently he could absorb them and become stronger. But with every second, the situation became worse. As they moved forward, more and more zombies joined them. Seeing a building ahead, the young man quickly dived inside. By barricading the door, James hoped he could fool the dead. However, a painfully familiar sound was heard from behind. Turning around, the guy saw that half of the zombies were lying on the floor. Taking a closer look, the hero recognized the monster as the former owner of this store. With a trembling hand, James picked up the stool and prepared to finish off the one he had just greeted. Having apologized, the young man dealt the decisive blow to the corpse, saying that it was time to get rid of soft-heartedness. When it was all over, a red envelope appeared over the woman's head. James reached out and touched the thing carefully, not knowing what to expect from it. The next moment, the system gave the guy a stimulating pill, which doubled his strength. The hero thought that first those bastards threw him out into the street, and now he was locked in this store. Covering his ears with his hands so as not to hear the zombies, the boy hoped to find a way to get out of there alive. First, James decided to stock up on supplies. Bottles of water, canned goods, cookies, and other products with a long shelf life were thrown into the backpack. Instead of a weapon, the young man found a pickaxe. But then the time for preparation ran out. James took advantage of the opportunity and unleashed his deadly weapon. During the test, he realized that the pickaxe blade was very dull and could barely penetrate the heads of the undead. And then his points started to fall, although the creatures were still moving. It followed from this that the program would still give characteristics even if they were not killed. After that, blow after blow rained down. From these dead men, James was able to get 250 points, and as a reward, the system gave him a red envelope and a chest. Turning away from his victims, the guy looked at his hands with interest. He figured out that even though the stats dropped after hits, only a certain amount could be obtained from one zombie. Now the hero's strength has increased to 82, speed to 15, and intelligence to 14. The system reported that it was opening the envelope and the chest. Thanks to the envelope, James was able to learn the art of swordsmanship, and from the chest, he got the Big Dipper cleaver. Realizing that he had figured out the system a little, the guy decided to leave here for a safer place. The fat man's next goal was to find his 3 offenders. He wanted them to regret their actions and desecrate the photo with Lillian. Imagining those bastards in their place as zombies, James killed them with even greater fury. At this time, a battle with the dead was also taking place nearby. While killing zombies, the scoundrels remembered who they were in life and showered them with insults. One of the guys suggested that James had already become one of the corpses, and then laughed. But they had no idea how wrong they were. Peeking out from around the corner, the young man noticed his enemies. The guys ran forward and didn't even know about the danger that lurked there. And our hero was glad that the target was coming into his hands, saving time on searching. But then he saw something else. A whole crowd of dead people was running after the idiots. Having decided to let the offenders go for now, James rushed to look for shelter. An open red envelope gave the skill of an experienced driver. As he ran away, the boy was sure that this skill would be useful to him. A couple of minutes later, James ran out to the girls' dormitory, but he was stopped by Teresa's nasty voice, who asked what he was doing there. She demanded that the guy leave here, since hordes of zombies could come running because of him. Looking up with displeasure, the hero thought that bad women live longer. The girl shouted loudly, in order to attract the zombies, that the guy's beloved Lillian was in the dining room. And this trick worked. Teresa said that James looked pathetic, and that he should get out of there while he was still in one piece. Meanwhile, the zombies were approaching. They announced their arrival with a vile roar, and unexpectedly for Teresa, the young man destroyed the dead in one blow. James glanced at his former boss and warned that he would get to her sooner or later. The girl looked at the former runt with doubt, and did not understand when he became so cool. Looking back, the young man decided that he shouldn't follow Teresa because of the zombies. At the entrance to the dormitory, the guy noticed a car and headed towards it. The good news was that the keys were still there. Not wanting to communicate with the dead, James pressed the pedal to the floor. As he passed Teresa, he informed her that he had opened the entrance for the dead, so she should prepare for guests. The guy no longer heard the disgruntled shouts from the window, as he was far away. The zombies they encountered along the way were crushed with pleasure. One by one, the former people died completely and brought James characteristics. However, all good things come to an end. Having jumped out of the burning car, the main character ran to the rector's office, which was nearby. Luckily, the zombies were attracted by the sound of the explosion, and they all headed towards the car. Thanks to the machine, the hero collected attributes, a red envelope and 2 bronze chests. The envelope revealed 3 axe skills, and hidden in the chests were a titanium chrome stiletto and a sickle-shaped axe. James now had a light, medium, and heavy weapon in his arsenal, which gave him an advantage in combat. The young man decided to spend the night here, but his attention was drawn to sounds coming from behind the closed door. The guy lowered the handle and opened the door slightly, and then he looked inside with doubt. James was completely unprepared for such a sight. In front of him hung 2 ordinary people, and around them scurried hungry dead people. But then it began to dawn on the main character. It turned out that someone, for the sake of their own skin, had hung living people here as bait, and this unknown person was going to commit a meanness again. All James heard before he burst inside was a man's voice, surprised that someone had found the room, and then the door slammed. The loud sound made all the dead creatures who had previously been attracted by the bait turn around. At this point, the hero realized that if he got out of here alive, then killing those 3 idiots would not be difficult for him. The heart was pounding wildly in the chest. The girl looked in horror at the approaching man, whose intentions were extremely clear. Grace began to beg to be let go, and then threatened that if she became one of the zombies, she would come for her rapist. The university's honorary rector stood before her and informed her that she would not have such an opportunity. The man said that either the captive would take care of all 3 at once, or each one separately. At this time, not far from the place where the girl was being abused, the last creatures were dying. However, for some reason, James was not receiving stats from the zombies he destroyed, and he did not understand the reason. And then it was as if someone heard his thoughts, and all the energy from the dead poured into the guy. The system couldn't keep up with the calculation of how many points increased strength, intelligence, and speed. The young man felt as if his body was about to explode. The rector leaned over Grace and demanded that she undress. But his sentence was interrupted mid-sentence. The rapists turned to the front door in surprise. and only in the eyes of the beauty did hope light up. It was James who noted that the office was quite lively. Thanks to the increase in characteristics, he evolved to a new title, Brave. The former head of the university asked the newcomer who he was. The hero, making a menacing voice, asked how the impudent man dared to forget him, since he himself remembered his voice perfectly well. The guy's eyes narrowed sternly and promised the man nothing good. And then it dawned on the rector that standing before him was the very man he had recently locked among the dead. Watching the young man walk towards Grace, the man asked him why he had come there. But James ignored the scoundrel and looked at the victim with pity. The next moment, the rector had the opportunity to observe a sword at his nose. The guy warned that he had recently chopped up several zombies with this weapon and cut off the heads of some. The hero's gaze took on a sinister glint, and he asked if it was possible to do this to people. The pervert will offer the commandant a try, since he was confident in his abilities and accomplices. Having surrounded James on 3 sides, the men attacked him. However, the weaklings chose as their opponent a man who was beyond their strength. In a matter of seconds, each of the opponents received a rebuff, and the young man was surprised by the fact that people's characteristics also dropped. Approaching the rector, James asked him what he now thought about what was happening. But in response, the man only shouted, saying that the servant had no right to raise his hand against him. Having gotten to his feet, the impudent fellow said that he remembered the guy. The rector noted James's excellent skills and then offered to join, promising money. In response, the hero punched the idiot in the face. Looking down at his boss, the guy said that there was no point in money now. Suddenly, the rector's accomplice from the side began to beg for mercy. The coward said he was forced to give up Grace under threat of death, leaving him no choice. However, the rapist's words had exactly the opposite effect. James demanded that the guy shut up and treat his girlfriend properly. The next moment, the undermen went to join his leader. The last opponent came out on the line. Under the stranger's pleas, the hero dragged him to his partners, since it was unlikely that he was a good person. The guy thought that if it weren't for the smell of blood, which can attract the dead, he would have already used the sword. Finding themselves in a pile-up, the former comrades began to sort things out, and they did it quite loudly. The result is a bunch of attracted zombies. James, who received his stats a few seconds later, was surprised at how weak his opponents were. Having made sure that there was no more danger, the hero headed towards the captive. Trembling with fear, Grace asked the guy to close the windows. Having fulfilled his friend's request, Jace decided to distract her and sent her in search of water. After a while, the beauty handed the guy a mug, barely holding it in her hands. Observing the timid gait, the young man decided that something needed to be done about it. Grabbing her hand and pulling her towards him, James shouted that he would do nothing to the one he had recently saved. But he didn't take into account that Grace could barely stand on her feet. That's why the next moment the girl tripped and flew straight towards the hero. James, not expecting such an outcome, couldn't resist, and the couple ended up on the floor. He had never in his life experienced such embarrassment as he did at that moment. Instantly getting to her feet, Grace began to apologize, and then asked how her savior was feeling. Without waiting for an answer, the beauty rushed away, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Watching the girl go, the hero thought that these scumbags had scared her to death. Grace had barely disappeared into the kitchen when her scream was heard from there. The thought immediately flashed through James's mind that she had met a dead man. Having run into the room, the hero realized what had frightened his acquaintance. Behind the wall, in the storage room, something was hitting the wall. Not wanting to put off solving the problem for later, the young man headed towards the source of the sound. Having opened the door, he began to slowly move along the corridor. To avoid being caught off guard by the dead man, James pulled the sword from the traveler's belt. The sound grew louder. The guy understood that a zombie could jump out at him at any moment. The dead did not keep us waiting. A couple of dozen minutes later, having come out into the kitchen, the hero reported that he had dealt with the creatures. However, the space in front of him was empty, and shrugging his shoulders, James headed to the bathroom. The guy's head was filled with painful thoughts that completely took over him. The hero himself didn't notice how he reached his destination. Upon entering the bathroom, the former commandant discovered something missing. The next second, a girl's squeal filled the space. Grace ran out into the hallway as if she had been attacked by a zombie, but a moment later she realized that she had forgotten all her clothes in the bathroom. The heroes had to once again experience the wild embarrassment of what was happening. The next morning, as soon as he opened his eyes, James thought that he still wanted to sleep. But plans quickly changed as the aromas of food reached his nose. Lillian leaned over him and announced that breakfast was ready. Instantly jumping up from his seat, the guy hugged the girl, shouting that he was glad to meet her. But when he stepped back, he realized that he had imagined it all. Jumping back, the hero began to apologize to Grace, but she, as if not paying attention, clarified the name by which she was called. Grabbing his acquaintance by the shoulders, James asked if she knew this girl. Looking down, The beauty admitted that she had recently rented a place with Lillian outside the campus. Gray said that when the virus outbreak occurred, her friend went home a little early. After receiving this news, James became furious. The outburst of anger was caused by Teresa's anger at lying about the location of his lover. Having apologized for his behavior, the young man sent her to the dining room, promising to come in a few minutes. However, the guy came to the conclusion that he would still have to check the dining room, because those 3 goats ran in that direction. The break for breakfast was short. As he was leaving, the young man asked Grace not to open the door for anyone but him. Nodding, the girl came a little closer and carefully adjusted her collar. Looking deeply into his eyes, she promised that everything would be fine. After saying goodbye to his friend, James rushed outside. The dead no longer inspired horror, but only caused discontent with the fact that one had to waste time on them. But there was also something pleasant. Stats increased, useful skills and weapons dropped out. However, the skill of using firearms seemed a little unnecessary to the guy, since it was not currently in his arsenal. An unpleasant female voice that mocked James tore him away from his thoughts. Teresa stuck her head out of the window again, and reported that because of the hero, a bunch of zombies broke into the dorm yesterday. The girl demanded that the guy go inside and clear the building, since those living inside needed to go outside. All this was said so loudly that all the zombies in the area should have fled to the noise. The former boss's plans came true. James understood Teresa's plan, but he was going to do it his own way. Already at the entrance to the hostel, the young man was met by a warm company of dead people. He confidently removed obstacles to get to his ill-wisher. On his way to Teresa, James kept encountering curious glances. Local residents were glad that someone came to their aid. Gradually, the hero got tired of this, and he barked at the girls to go back to their place. Although the number of zombies was decreasing, they were still found on the building's territory. The guy took advantage of this and improved his stats. After eliminating another creature, a red envelope fell out. Inside was the culinary skill, which provided knowledge about all the different types of food and how to prepare them. The thought flashed through James's mind that the system now wanted to make a chef out of him. Suddenly, Teresa came out of the room next door. She ordered the guy to take her bag and fight his way out, promising to reward him in the end. And then the girl grinned, as if everything was going according to some plan of hers. But the next moment, everything turned around 180 degrees. Having dragged the scoundrel to the window, James bent her body over and asked why she lied about Lillian. The dark-haired girl screamed hysterically that she was simply jealous of her competitor, but had no bad intentions. And then the young man reminded Teresa of all her atrocities while he was under her control. The deceiver tried to justify her actions by saying that everyone was going out of their way to please her. Everyone except the hero. The next stage of the attempt to save his life was a plea for mercy. However, James said that Teresa was one of those creatures who were willing to sacrifice others for themselves, and sent her down. He reported that all the girl's actions were driven only by vanity. Using her last chance for salvation, the commandant grabbed the guy with her legs and began to ask for forgiveness. The next moment, cries for help came from the lower floors. This came as a big surprise to James, but the surprises didn't end there. To everyone's surprise, zombies learned to climb walls. Crying, the hero wanted to answer her, but the living corpse that appeared behind him disrupted this plan. James was surprised at how quickly the enemy was able to reach the second floor. Due to the guy's sudden movement, the girl was unable to hold on to him and began to fall down, and the hand of one of the zombies was too close to her. Noticing this, James managed to grab Teresa at the last moment and prevent her from falling. The fact that the guy saved her was a big surprise for the former boss. The hero angrily and rudely demanded that his legs be removed, and even this attitude towards oneself did not spoil the impression of the rescue. Unaware of his new admirer, James grabbed a weapon from his inventory and headed towards the zombies. One precise blow, and there is one less creature in this world. The guy understood that he had to hold the corridor. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to escape later. From the outside, James's battle looked like he had been doing this his whole life, and Teresa decided that the hero was protecting her, and not his opportunity to break out. She decided to express her gratitude and distracted the former fat man from the fight. The girl began to apologize again, and then asked to take her with him and give him a chance to make amends. James smirked and said he wasn't so generous as to bother with her. Teresa interpreted it differently, deciding that these words meant that the guy had forgiven her. Meanwhile, the hero decided to lure all the zombies to the roof, since there is a lot of space there. A few minutes later, he broke down the door and burst into the very top. The young man noted that there was a small group of zombies on the back platform of the dormitory, which he could easily break through. But suddenly his movements were restrained by someone from behind. Teresa, squeezing James's chest, declared that she would not leave him. This phrase angered the hero, and he asked the girl with displeasure what was wrong with her. While the guy was trying to deal with the unexpected obstacle, zombies burst onto the roof. Without wasting time fighting, The young man pushed off and jumped down. Ideas flashed through my head about how I could avoid getting hurt when falling from such a height. In the end, James chose the easiest one. He took out his sword and tried to slow down its movement. The girl's squealing prevented him from thinking about his next plan, and the young man asked her to shut up. Although the request was fulfilled, to his regret the guy realized that the trick didn't work. But then an idea came to mind, and contradicting himself, James asked Teresa to shout as loudly as possible. Sensing his partner's confusion, the young man shouted at her. The second time, the commandant understood what was required of her and began to squeal. The dark-haired woman's actions attracted more and more dead people to the place of their descent. James came to the conclusion that it was time to take action. Pushing off from the wall, the young man tried to direct his body in the direction where there were more dead people. The creatures created a reliable landing cushion with their bodies, which the guy took advantage of. However, the next moment we had to get ourselves together and start the battle. The system reported that the intelligence level had reached 50, for which the ability to automatically pick up nearby objects was obtained. This news lifted James's spirits a little, but then he remembered one misunderstanding. Catching the young man's gaze, Teresa blushed with embarrassment. The guy decided to test his new ability on the scoundrel and ordered her to stand up. However, only the girl's blouse attempted to carry out the order. James concluded that at this stage he could only control objects. The young man decided that since he had managed to escape the zombies, he should return to his previous plan and find those 3 idiots. Fearing that she would be left alone, Teresa caught up with the guy and demanded that he not leave her. James angrily demanded that his former boss leave him alone. But having received a refusal, the main character decided to act. The guy threw the repellent over his back and roughly sent it away. Teresa, who had hit the asphalt, did not evoke any pity in him. The young man said that he had already shown generosity, and now it was better for her to stay away from him. The student canteen was not empty at this time. However, it was occupied by completely unpleasant people. The man sighed sadly and said that he was bored, since there was no entertainment left in the world except women. And the girl sitting and sobbing in front of him did not evoke any feelings other than anger. Having hit the captive, the scoundrel demanded that she stop whining, otherwise he would end up on the street. A stranger who entered the room at that moment asked his friend why he was so angry with the girls. The man chuckled and suggested going to the next building and bringing a couple of new girls here. But their plans were disrupted. The rapists, who were not expecting anyone, opened their mouths in surprise. The program, using auto-selection, placed a steel pike into James's hands. The man recognized the guest as a dormitory worker, and the way he burst onto the second floor caused confusion. Deciding not to miss the opportunity to escape, he asked for help to get out of here, promising these 2 beauties in exchange. But this proposal did not impress our hero. The nasty guy asked James not to get carried away and to accept such a great offer. However, what happened next was something the rapist did not plan. The sound of bone crunching echoed throughout the entire floor, and then the whole space was filled with choice obscenities. Having called the insolent man scum, James turned to his next target. At this time, help came running in response to the boy's screams. The assistants, as if on command, unanimously rushed with their fists at our hero. But he was ready for it. A smile played on her lips, and James asked if that was all. A turn of the hand and the crunching sound is heard again. When all the pawns were left behind, the young man headed towards the leader. He decided to play his trump card and announced that he was the rector's son, making him untouchable. But James successfully ignored the warning. The young man asked his opponent to stop pretending to be someone he knows not who, and the next second a scream rang out across the entire campus. A crowd of people came running to the noise. Everyone looked warily at James as he left the room where he had dealt with their comrades. Among those watching were the 3 guys the young man had been so persistently looking for. And as soon as the idiots started talking, the commandant noticed them. To his foolishness, Timothy, having called the hero names, asked if he remembered their company. Laughing, the impudent fellow recalled how he had defiled the photo with Lillian. The next reason for ridicule was the weapon that James was holding in his hands. Nearby, the injured rich kid was dreaming about how to deal with the young man. The partner asked the boss to tone down his ardor and turned his attention to what was happening outside the door. James had met with 3 thugs. The man recalled that the 3 had fought their way through a crowd of zombies on the first floor to get to the second. Inspired, the major got up from the floor and declared that he wanted to see James screw up. And it seemed that the dream was about to come true, but life had other realities. Before my eyes was a completely different picture, which did not meet expectations. Those same thugs were lying on the floor and couldn't understand where the fat guy got so much strength from. At that moment, James walked up to Timothy and ordered him to get out of here. The idiot tried to reason with the hero and said that they could be more useful alive and become his fighters. The rest of the people also sided with the Gopnik, seeing reason in his words. It was surprising to the young man that someone supported these scoundrels. Timothy immediately proved his abnormality by trying again to attack someone who was obviously stronger, and he paid for it. Stepping on the body of the fallen enemy, James reminded them of how he had welcomed them into his shelter and paid dearly for it. At that moment, two henchmen ran towards the young man, shouting that they were trying to motivate the fat man to become stronger. However, before they could even reach James, they were slammed into the wall. For beating up 3 idiots, our hero received the maximum number of points, and this caused amazement. But then a female voice was heard asking for mercy for the thugs. The stranger said that these monsters helped in clearing the first floor, and that is why they are safe. Among the crowd of men, languid sighs and one name were heard: Elizabeth Parker. Looking sternly at the girl, James began to approach her. He swung his weapon, which flew a centimeter away from the beauty. However, it pierced the wall nearby. The young man stated that if the group abandoned these people, they themselves would ultimately suffer from them. The program reported that the power level had exceeded 200 points, and a side effect was about to occur. Feeling his consciousness leaving him, James began to curse the system. By chance, the guy's forehead hit the very spot he had recently pierced with a spear, and then the wall collapsed, and the couple that were standing nearby flew down. Opening his eyes, James saw above him the guys who had suffered from him first. He heard the ridicule directed at him, but due to lack of strength, he could not respond. The body felt like a stranger and didn't allow me to make even the slightest movement. After a couple of minutes, the hero was finally able to sit up and felt as if 1,000 needles had pierced his body. Looking forward, James was surprised to see Elizabeth standing bravely in front of him, holding a weapon in her hands. Looking back, the girl reported that they were not in the best position now. The young man realized that the beauty had protected him while he was unconscious. Suddenly, Elizabeth was attacked by 2 dead men. The young man tried to warn her of the danger, but he understood that his friend had too little experience in such matters. Arriving nearby in a matter of seconds, the young man repelled the attack and protected the local goddess. Looking at the girl, James asked to leave the rest of the opponents to him. 2 people were watching the battle from above. The major joyfully announced that now his enemy would definitely die, and his sidekick suggested that our hero fight again. But then someone pushed the couple in the back, and with cries of horror they flew towards the one they had just tried to tease. It was an awkward situation for them. The rapists turned around, hoping to see the one who had set them up, but a shadow was already hanging over them, which came to fulfill the wish for a new fight between them. At this time, the guy who was watching the thugs asked why they had thrown out the rich kids. The impudent ones explained that when James and those 2 died, they would be able to take their place. The young man turned to the surprised Elizabeth and explained that the thugs had not helped him, but had gotten rid of his competitors. But an imperceptible movement to the side distracted the hero from his explanations. James reacted instantly and used his weapon. The girl, unaware of the danger, was frightened, but later understood the reason for such an act. The hero simply wanted to save Elizabeth from the fate of becoming food for the dead. Looking into the eyes of her acquaintance, the beauty thanked him for saving her. Wanting to shake James's hand, the girl extended hers forward. The realization flashed through the goddess's mind that it was only thanks to this man that she was still alive. But the hero understood everything in his own way, and deciding that his partner needed a sword, he handed her one of his weapons. As he passed Elizabeth, the young man asked her to cover his back. As James went on the attack, he thought that he felt weakened, so he should deal with the zombies quickly. The guy quickly scattered the first row of opponents to the sides, and then the next question arose: why don't the dead anymore drop stats? But James decided to put off this problem for later, since the dead were a priority. Suddenly, Elizabeth called out to him from behind and said that she would help him in the fight. The girl caught up with the young man and stood behind him, and her fans didn't even take a step to help, choosing to watch everything from a safe distance. Suddenly the building shook. The boys began to look at each other nervously, deciding that an earthquake was starting. However, things were much worse. It is unknown where the mutant zombie came from. His steps and roar made the whole area tremble. James thought that this monster was different from the others, and should not be allowed to come near Elizabeth. The young man decided to attack first, so that the dead man would not have a chance to harm them. And it seemed that only a few moments remained until victory. But this turned out to be an illusion. The zombie, unlike his fellows, was able to block the attack. Even though the spear was stuck in his hand, the monster had no trouble getting rid of the obstacle. It looked as if James's weapon was causing the monster only minor discomfort. The young man, sadly observing this reaction, realized that it would not be easy. But then Elizabeth entered the battle and threw the guy behind her. She stated that she was taking on the mutant because James had no weapon. The monster seemed not to notice the change of enemy and prepared to strike. At that moment, the hero realized that his protector would not be able to cope with such power. James rushed forward and shouted that he would never hide behind a girl's back. He activated the titanium chrome sword he had received before entering the dining room in his hands. The The zombie's fate was sealed. Looking at the defeated enemy, the guy stated that zombies are also capable of becoming stronger. When asked by a friend how she was feeling, Elizabeth said that she was doing well. It flashed through the girl's mind that she could never have imagined how that nondescript guy could change. In response, she received only an uncomprehending look from James, since he had no idea what thoughts were in the beauty's head. The next moment, the young man turned away from his partner and said that not all the problems had been solved yet. However, besides the dead, there was another obstacle to freedom. The three bastards noticed James's fatigue and decided to take advantage of it. They ran out from around the corner and headed straight towards our hero. When Elizabeth complained about the dishonesty of such an act, the guys just chuckled and said nothing. Timothy was the fastest, and finding himself next to James, attacked. Hearing his partner's scream, the young man turned around. But even he realized that he would no longer have time to dodge. The zombies that attacked the young man from the opposite side added to the difficulty. Suddenly, the system reported that the final stage of body transformation had been initiated. She also initiated the launch of the system space. After this notification, our hero disappeared. No one present expected such a turn of events. But no one has cancelled the zombie attack, and they haven't disappeared anywhere. Due to the confusion, the Gopniks did not have time to avoid the dead men, and nothing could help them. Elizabeth was supposed to be the next victim of these creatures. The exhausted girl was quite easy to deal with. The next moment she felt zombie teeth sink into her throat and begin to tear at her delicate skin. James, who had never actually disappeared, was watching all of this. All this time he was inside a sphere that made the young man completely invisible and inaudible to those around him. The observers could only discuss James's disappearance, and none of them even thought of helping Elizabeth, who was in trouble. As a result, the weak girl managed on her own. Somehow she got out from under the monster and tried to move as far away from him as possible. However, due to the fuss, Elizabeth did not notice the bite in time. In order not to harm anyone, the beauty decided to commit suicide before she became one of the monsters, but some were against it. The useless inhabitants of the dining hall were unanimously surprised by the disappearance of their goddess. The system informed James that he needed the assistance of a character of the opposite sex to transform. During the transformation, the virus in the assistant's body will be removed. The guy told the girl about this and asked her to help him. Looking at her new friend, Elizabeth decided to trust him completely. Unexpectedly for her, all the clothes disappeared from her body. The beauty's face showed wild confusion, but it was too late to give up. And the one who was opposite made a positive impression from all sides. Smiling, the young man asked if the girl was ready. Looking down at the floor, Elizabeth agreed. The body transformation process has been activated, and if the sphere let in sounds, the audience could turn red all the way to their ears. After some time, the program congratulated the host on the completion of the transformation and Elizabeth's recovery. The system notified James that he had received Glenn's uniform, Glenn's combat boots, and the Ursa Major Blade's power-up. Having opened his characteristics, the young man saw a new title, Guardian, which gave healing space, and was surprised by this. Then system achievements began to load. After looking at the table, the young man realized that the previous award was received due to an achievement. He came to the conclusion that to get more rewards, he needed to unlock other achievements. When the transformation was completed, the sphere ceased to exist. The guy looked unkindly at the herd of rich kids and realized that he did not want to give Elizabeth to them. Timothy, who had already turned into a zombie, was standing next to the couple, and our hero, swinging his sword, destroyed him. And then, holding the girl by the waist, James led her to a safe place. However, the most useless people in the town began to resent the fact that now there was no one to protect them. In response, the guy told them that if anyone went with him, they would die even faster. The villains began to get indignant and shout that James could only save beauties, and he didn't care about the rest. Elizabeth heard all these unpleasant words, and they outraged her to the extreme. Stopping, the beauty asked her friend for his sword. Having received what she wanted, the girl headed towards the hole in the wall and glared at those who were there. A clear throw and the guys squealed like pigs. Elizabeth shouted that the idiots had been cleared of the zombies on the ground floor, and that now everything was in their hands. And then she said that if they are no good for anything, then there is no point in sticking their necks out. After exchanging glances, the rich kids decided to stay put and not seek death. When our hero followed the girl, he looked at her with admiration, but did not expect that she had such a strong character. Grace heard a knock. Opening the door, the girl saw James and smiled happily. However, her joy disappeared as soon as she saw the stranger, whom the guy introduced as Elizabeth Parker. And next in line for disappointment was our hero. Teresa rushed at him, declaring that the young man would not be able to get rid of her so easily. Catching her friend's displeased look, Grace began to justify herself, saying that she felt sorry for the poor girl. Rolling his eyes, James asked his friend to show Elizabeth where the bathroom was, so she could clean the wounds. and the crazy woman continued to hang on the guy, shouting something about fate and connection. She didn't respond to all of James's attempts to detach her from his body. However, the loud noise attracted them and made them fall silent. The other residents also heard the sound of gunshots. Jumping for joy, Teresa declared that it was her father who had come to save her. Taking advantage of the fact that the girl had let go of him, the young man began to move, but he hit her with his shoulder and the scoundrel began to fall to the floor. The girls, not expecting such an outcome, covered their mouths with their hands in fear. Our hero tried to save the situation, but it was already too late. The guy angrily said that he should have left him alone long ago instead of bothering him. In response, Teresa stuck out her tongue and said that in that case there was no need to hold her legs so tightly. Having let the impudent woman go, James said that, judging by the sounds of gunfire, the military was far away and it was worth preparing. The girl, still lying on the floor, noted that it was quite dirty here. Standing up, Teresa invited Elizabeth to go to the bathroom with her, and she agreed. Grace was delighted by this, as it gave her the opportunity to be alone with James. However, the dark-haired girl noticed this and said that the girl should not stay here alone. Having grabbed the two beauties, the impudent girl said with a smile that they should get to know each other better and chat. Hot water filled the bathtub with steam. Elizabeth noted that James behaved cautiously and hostilely towards others. Teresa, standing by the mirror, said that she knew something about this. She said that this happened, among other things, because of her attitude towards the guy. Because when he came to university, he was always willing to help others. Recently, two unknown guys started breaking into the dormitory. They claimed that they were delayed because they were helping an old woman and therefore could not return on time. Because of his kind-heartedness, James let the poor fellows in, but it turned out to be in vain. After some time, Teresa showed up in his room with complaints. She stated that a computer had disappeared from one of the students' rooms, and that the boy had recently let strangers in. The police officer who came with the girl demanded that the young man come to the station. Teresa said it later turned out that James had nothing to do with the incident, but his reputation had already been damaged. The scoundrel said that she tried to apologize to the guy for what happened. However, she never thought that it could have such an effect on the hero. Angered at the dark-haired woman, Elizabeth said that it was no wonder James treated her badly. After these words, Teresa felt wildly embarrassed. However, Elizabeth did not stop at words and hit the girl. The former boss said with displeasure that everything happened because of a misunderstanding. But the beauty said that an apology alone was not enough for such an accusation. After the showdown, the girls went out to James. Standing nearby, they apologized for the delay. Noticing the guy's gaze on her, Teresa asked him not to look at her, saying that she had burned herself. Embarrassed, the young man said that he wanted to clarify something with her. Immediately forgetting about her cheek, the girl sat down next to James and said that he could ask any question. He asked why, when she heard the shots, she thought it was her father who had come. Teresa said that her father was a colonel and could not abandon his daughter in danger. Now it became clear to everyone why the scoundrel behaves as if she were a spoiled young lady. After such news, Elizabeth suggested that everyone introduce themselves to each other again for greater mutual understanding. She said that her family is the bearers of ancient martial arts. Grace then took the floor and said that she works as a consultant at the university. When the girls started talking about yesterday, the guy asked her not to think about the past. It was James's turn, and he introduced himself as a dorm worker who had always dreamed of going to university. However, after the end of the world, the young man had only one goal left: to save Lillian. The guy suggested that each of those present had their own goal, and it should be thought out before the military arrived. Grace glanced sideways at Elizabeth and thought that if she had her skills, she could stay with the boy and help. James suggested that everyone should get some rest and gain strength. Rector's room in the dormitory. Tormented by insomnia, the hero thought about his parents. Suddenly someone lay down next to him and hugged his torso. The first thought in the guy's head was that someone was attacking him. He jumped up abruptly and easily overpowered the uninvited guest. But then recognition flashed in his eyes. Teresa, lying underneath him, said that she had come to ask for forgiveness and to talk. Feeling that the room's temporary owner was not in the mood to talk, the girl asked why he hated her. Approaching the window, James reminded her that the girl had caused him problems time and time again. Teresa admitted she had been wrong all along and was grateful for her rescue, despite her long-standing grievances. She said that if the young man could forgive her, then she would not object to anything he did next. Looking at the scoundrel with displeasure, James asked her to simply not cause him trouble. That was all he needed. Suddenly loud footsteps were heard. The girls burst into the room and announced that soldiers had arrived. Looking out the window, James heard the soldiers outside calling for survivors. Right in front of their building, there was a battle between soldiers and zombies. The young man thought that help had arrived much earlier than expected. Turning to his partners, he asked if they had decided what they would do next. Grace decided to follow the rescue party. Elizabeth suggested that they go together to find Lillian and then find her parents. But James suggested that she wait for him at the collection point, since the search for his beloved was his personal business. Teresa did not like the proposal, and said that she could ask her father to provide a detachment of soldiers to help. However, the young man refused, as he believed that he could cope faster alone. The girl said with resentment that James was not giving her the opportunity to help him in any way. Not paying attention to the girl, the hero asked Grace where Lillian lived. But then the partner said that the heroine should be looked for in her brother, and then gave the address. In order not to waste time saying goodbye, the young man got dressed and headed towards his new destination. Teresa told her friend that she envied Lillian, for whom the young man was so worried. Grace stated that during the days when James was feeling ill, only his beloved took care of him. And then the military man's daughter reported that she saw Lillian leaving the university with another guy. At this time, explosions thundered in the city. Our hero decided that he should move along the rooftops, as this was the safest way, and his partners were already safe. Strange things were happening not far from the main events. There were dead zombies lying on the floor, and the other dead were to blame for everything, devouring their fellows. Every destroyed corpse gave them strength. But then one of them was attracted by a loud sound. What happened behind us was a complete surprise. In a flash, the empowered zombie was devoured by an even larger monster. He froze to send the prey into his stomach, and then he growled loudly, and his body was covered in discharges. The monster crouched to the ground, but not from impotence, but because it was now more convenient for him to support the weight of his body. Our hero successfully reached the place where Lily's brother lived. He looked carefully at the house numbers so as not to miss the one he was interested in. Having found the right one, the young man confidently knocked on the door. The thought immediately came to mind of what he would do if the girl was not here. But from behind the door came a familiar voice demanding that the guest leave. However, the door began to open slowly, and behind her was our hero's friend, Stefan. Recognition flashed in his eyes. The next moment, the guy rushed to his friend, wondering when he had managed to become so thin. James said that he did not understand how his friend ended up there, and where Lillian and her brother were. When Stefan asked how James got here, he was told that he hadn't encountered a single zombie on the way. Smiling, the guy said that the girl was there and invited her into the house. Walking into the bedroom, the red-haired man called out to the one lying on the bed. Seeing that the girl was not reacting, Stefan warned her that she had been busy with her sick brother all night and had only just gone to bed to rest. He tried again, announcing James's arrival. However, worrying about his friend, the hero asked not to wake her. The young man asked how his friend had coped with the epidemic and how he had ended up here. Noticing the frightened expression on his face, the guy asked him not to evade the answers. Stefan hunched his shoulders and admitted that he had been in a relationship with Lillian for a long time, and it was she who brought him here. James's face darkened and he asked why. In that case, the guy always said he didn't like her. Without waiting for an answer, the young man turned around and declared that in that case he would not disturb them. Stefan got scared and asked his friend to stay here, warning that there were a lot of zombies outside. Without turning around, James said there was no need to worry about him. Trying to detain the hero, the red-haired man said that Lillian had prepared something for him. The young man believed his friend's words and followed him into the depths of the house. Opening the door to the dark room, Stefan said that the thing was lying on the table. James, entering the room, admitted that he could not see anything. Looking suspiciously at his friend, the hero asked where the switch was. Stefan suggested that the guy look for it himself, and then he slammed the door. From behind the door came the voice of the red goat, saying that he was not in a relationship with Lily, but had simply become friends with her brother. After, Stefan wanted to offer the hero some fun with her brother, but unfortunately for him, James was very strong. A voice came from the depths of the room, saying that he had considered the idiot a friend, but he had decided to commit murder. Leaving the room, James said that he had killed a lot of zombies, and one would not be enough for his entertainment. Frightened, Stefan decided to try to rectify the situation and gain our hero's trust. The young man stood up and said that James had misunderstood everything. However, the villain failed to deceive the hero again. A loud scream filled with horror echoed through the house. The noise brought Lillian to her senses. Suddenly, someone pulled up the blanket that had been comfortably wrapped around her body. It turned out that the girl was tied up and unable to move. Realizing that she was trapped, Lillian began to cry, but the guy asked her to calm down. With light movements, our hero freed his beloved from her bonds. Having freed herself, the first thing the girl asked was why James had changed so much. But then the teacher remembered Stefan and suggested talking after she dealt with him. Blows rained down on Lillian's beret, but Stefan was already infected and nothing could help him. He regretted only one thing, that he hadn't had time to have fun with Lillian. The girl also heard these thoughts. However, she was even more angered by the way the guy behaved towards her brother. Losing her patience, Lillian shouted that the scoundrel would pay for this. but Stefan had already lost his humanity. Hearing the sound, the dead man rushed forward, wanting to kill his first victim. For a moment, the girl even felt sorry for her friend. And this could have been her mistake, but James did not let the irreparable happen. His weapon blew Stefan away. The zombie's body was nailed to the door, preventing it from attacking. Feeling a hand on her shoulder, Lillian asked our hero not to stop her. However, the guy said he just wanted to give her a knife. In a moment, there is one less monster in the room. Lillian struck mercilessly, releasing her anger. She refused to accept the fact that this man had killed her brother. The number of wounds on the dead Stefan increased with each passing second. Wanting to calm his beloved, James hugged her and told her that it was all over. The knife fell to the floor with a clang, and then a bitter female cry was heard. Once the initial bitterness of loss had subsided, the couple found the strength to bury Lillian's brother. The girl blamed herself for everything that happened. In an effort to help her, James told her that there was no need to wallow in sadness, as Stefan was difficult to figure out. Lily reported that she had met the traitor on her way to her brother, who had followed her, saying that he wanted to visit a friend. Stroking his beloved on the head, the hero promised that now everything would be fine. Having thanked him for saving her, the girl asked how James ended up there. Feeling awkward, the guy said that he came to save her. Embarrassed, the beauty assumed that the young man had come because he had deep sympathy for her. Not expecting this, James blushed and tried to deny everything. However, the girl moved a little closer and regretfully asked why he didn't like her. Realizing that this was his chance, our hero nevertheless plucked up his resolve. He said that he always liked Lily because she communicated normally with him. The girl explained that she had always paid attention to him, but before, James looked simple-minded and stupid. Coming closer, the beloved admitted that she also liked the guy. And the next moment, the main character's biggest dream came true. The items indicated how the characters were eagerly making their way to bed. They found each other only after the end of the world, and they tried to enjoy every second together. The girl was grateful to her savior for his help and assistance in avenging her brother. She said it felt good to have someone there to protect her. Getting out of bed, Lillian said that she wanted to cook dinner for James. But suddenly the beauty fell. Seeing the worried look, the girl explained that she felt as if her body began to move faster. An idea occurred to James as to why this had happened, and he decided to test it in practice right away. Such enthusiasm from her lover came as a surprise to Lillian. At this time, somewhere nearby, a group of bandits entered the private sector. They hoped to get something in the rich people's area. The villains decided to split up and check the area, but then one of the men reported that he had found a zombie eating a concrete wall. The same message came from the other side of the street. Sensing that something was fishy, the leader ordered his subordinates to flee. But one of the subordinates did not take this seriously. Considering himself a professional zombie exterminator, the man rushed into the attack. However, disappointment awaited him. His blade did not penetrate the dead man's body even a millimeter. The bandit paid for his overconfidence immediately. The boss standing nearby rushed away, shouting to the others that the dead had mutated. And then one of the group members noticed a light burning in one of the houses. Without wasting a second, the entire crowd rushed towards the saving light. It was predictable that the house where the bandits rushed was the house with our heroes. Unaware of the danger, James thought that the reason for Lily's increased speed was definitely him. The guy said that he was going to send the girl to a refugee center, and he himself would go look for her parents. However, the beauty said that she would go with him. Wanting to bring his beloved to his senses, James stood up from his seat and said that it was dangerous. Lillian hunched her shoulders and asked if she really was just a burden in the guy's eyes. Jumping up abruptly, the girl said that she could protect herself and would not cause trouble for James. Having given in to the redhead's pressure, the hero said that tomorrow, in any case, he would have to go to the collection point. Lillian said that the neighbor was constantly storing food in her house, so her house should be checked. The girl justified her haste by saying that she wanted to quickly go and look for her parents. But as soon as she opened the front door, someone immediately tried to break into the house. As the gap grew larger, Lily could see distorted faces. The bandits immediately cast a lustful glance at the mistress of the house. Shouting that strangers were not welcome here, the beauty tried to close the door. The boss, preventing the door from closing, promised that he would not harm Lillian and asked for protection from the zombies pursuing them. James, who was watching the scene from the sidelines, immediately understood the guests' intentions and decided to play along. He shouted for Lillian to let the strangers inside. Unaware of our hero's thoughts, the robbers confidently walked inside. As they moved through the house, the men thanked the hosts for their hospitality. When the guests approached James, he asked why they had not turned to the military for protection. The guy said that it seemed as if the group was planning something bad. Although the boss tried to deny what was said, another man said that these assumptions were correct. Frowning, James asked why they had opened up so quickly. Pointing his sword at the hero, the bandit threatened to cut him open for his insolence. The boss asked his subordinate to slow down, because their opponent looked too confident. But the fat man ignored all the leader's warnings. He attacked our hero, saying that his knife had been yearning for blood for a long time. However, as soon as the bandit reached the place where his target was, he discovered emptiness there. The comrades warned the scoundrel that the enemy was behind him, but James was faster. As a result, the fat man was thrown back several meters. The man who watched the beating didn't even think that the owner of the house could be so strong. The bandit decided to act in a less than honest manner. At this time, James looked at his stats and realized that the defeated enemy had given him few points. Suddenly, the boy heard his name being called. The bandit held a knife to Lily's neck and said that if James didn't calm down, his woman would die. The man warned that the entire knife was covered in dangerous zombie blood. Unfortunately for him, the freak didn't take the girl herself into account. Not wanting to be a burden, the beauty stepped painfully on the bandit's foot. And this movement decided the robber's entire fate. The boss saw this and realized that he must not let his comrade turn. Whispering an apology in his friend's ear, the man began to strangle him. Watching the stranger's actions, the guy thought that only he had brains. Bowing his head, the boss asked permission to take the fat man and then leave. But then he heard a familiar sound. All three characters who remained conscious began to look tensely towards the doors. Loud crack. The door and part of the wall fly apart, and a huge mutant appears in the opening. Nobody expected to see such a brute among the zombies. Lillian hid behind James's back in fear. Realizing that he had never seen such a dead person before, the guy picked up his beloved in his arms, deciding to flee. Following their command, the monster threw fragments of the wall, but they were able to dodge without being injured. At this time, the thug began to prepare for a new attack. Looking at Eric, James ordered him to protect Lillian at the cost of his life. And then the young man felt the girl pulling at his jacket. Turning around, the hero was met with a worried look and a question about whether he could cope with the monster alone. Smiling, the guy said that he had lost count of the number of monsters he had destroyed. The next moment the fight began. Our hero confidently attacked the enemy. It seemed as if his sword had pierced the zombie's flesh. However, everything was not so simple. As soon as the dust from the blow cleared, James realized that the blade had not penetrated the monster. What was even worse was that the sword wouldn't come out. Taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, the zombie waved his hand and threw him back. While James was recovering from the attack, the dead man got rid of the nasty splinter. Noticing that the man had approached again, the monster roared and prepared to get rid of the enemy with his hands. Dodging a new attack, the young man thought he was seeing a mutated zombie for the first time. Wanting to protect Lily, the guy picked up a new weapon and rushed at the zombies. Using a long-range technique, James threw his spear towards the giant. However, it was all in vain. Our hero couldn't believe that the dead man had no weak spots. Realizing that he had to win at any cost, the guy decided to test different options. Several attacks carried out in a row helped to find out some things. The monster's weakness was that it was unable to attack continuously. And finally, the monster revealed itself. James did not fail to take advantage of this. As a result of a successful strike, the zombie, for the first time in the entire battle, suffered a defeat. But this only made him angry. However, the monster did not attack immediately, but used its secret trump card. The giant's call spread far beyond the house where our heroes were. One after another, small zombies arrived to help the monster. The presence of such an ability turned out to be an unpleasant surprise for the living. James decided to trust his former enemy and threw him his weapon. The guy shouted that the liquidation of the small change falls on the shoulders of the former bandit. But the time allotted for preparation has expired. A huge zombie rushed to attack. Our hero barely managed to put up a block, otherwise everything could have ended badly. But due to the force of the blow, the young man flew back. Seeing this picture, Eric called James and asked if he was alive. Emerging from the cloud of dust, the guy said that he couldn't be killed with such a technique. Coming closer to the monster, James suggested trying to attack again. The enemy's reaction was not long in coming. He instantly jumped up and, growling loudly, headed towards the character. As he dodged, the young man thought that as long as the zombie was focused on him, Lily shouldn't be in any danger. Not far from the battle site, a fat man began to come to his senses. Noticing the monster running towards him, Tobias assumed that the man who had injured him had turned into a zombie. Jumping up from his seat, the man decided to take revenge on his offender. It was at this moment that Tobias's short vigil ended. His body broke through the wall. Looking at the fat man, our hero realized that he had completely forgotten about the existence of this person. While James was looking at the bandit, a zombie flew towards him. One hit and the monster no longer obstructs the view. However, the next second, two more dead men appeared in front of the hero's face. The guy realized that the giant was throwing low-level zombies at him, and this irritated him. During the fight, the weapon James was using could not withstand the pressure and broke. The mutant didn't care about the hero's difficulties, so he prepared a new projectile, but he was prevented from attacking. Turning around, James angrily told Eric not to interfere and to deal with his dead. The man chuckled and said that he had already sorted everything out. The zombie, covering his eyes with his hand, rushed forward, wanting to destroy his target. The guy considered whether or not he should use his strongest ability now. In the end, James made a positive decision. The blow was so powerful that a hole appeared right in the center of the zombie's body. The fight was over. The defeated monster lay on the floor and showed no signs of life. For defeating the mutant, James received the Panlong assault rifle. But such a large expenditure of energy had a small drawback. The first thing the hero saw in front of him when he opened his eyes was Lillian. He immediately asked how long he had been unconscious. The girl reassured him, saying that not much time had passed, and Eric had managed to barricade all the entrances from the zombies. The young man thought that the ability of the dead to mutate was bad news, and that he should find his parents as soon as possible. Turning around, James informed his beloved that they needed to head to the collection point quickly. Smiling, Lillian said that they could move on, since all the business here was finished. And then Eric drew attention to himself and asked to take them with him. This question left James confused. After some time in the vicinity of the private sector, our small group fought its way to the point. As a local resident, Lillian said that they would reach their destination in half a day. Suddenly, Eric's cry was heard that they had managed to get a car. The former bandits stood surrounded by zombies and guarded the car from them. At that moment, the hero thought that taking these two with him wasn't the worst idea. Not wanting to waste time, James destroyed all the obstacles in a couple of seconds. His blows were precise and measured. Tobias watched the battle with his mouth open, as he had never seen such strong people in his life. Eric reported that yesterday the hero was able to destroy that zombie with one blow, so there is no need to doubt his strength. The fat man, catching James's gaze, waved his hand in fear and said that he did not want to experience all of his comrades' capabilities on himself. While on the road, the guy noted that they were incredibly lucky to have a full tank of gas, as this is a rarity these days. Thanks to the found car, travel time was reduced significantly. But behind the team's backs, there remains something that will prevent them from living peacefully in the future. At the collection point for the surviving population, Grace and Elizabeth distributed food. They tried to calm the worried people with kind smiles and words. Suddenly, a dark-haired guy approached her friend and started trying to flirt with Elizabeth. Enraged, the girl demanded that Bill leave her alone and stop relying on his financial situation in the past. Not wanting to give up, the thug said that there was water and food in the first area, and she could very well get there. Holding the baguette to the enemy's forehead, Elizabeth shouted in displeasure that in the past, James should have been allowed to throw it to the zombies. Bill said that the beauty should have appreciated his kindness. Offended by yet another refusal, the guy turned away and walked away. Letting go of the situation, Elizabeth looked down and saw a small acquaintance. The girl said that she needed 2 portions, for herself and her grandfather. Smiling, the heroine gave the little girl what she asked for, as well as some sweets she had found. But Bill also noticed the warm attitude towards the child, and then decided to take revenge on the beauty with the help of the little one. And after some time, the villain carried out his plan. While in their room, the girls discussed the situation that had happened during the day. And then Grace started talking about Teresa, who often starts talking about James. And just as Elizabeth wanted to ask her friend something, there was an insistent knock on the door. The heroine hurried to the door. What awaited her outside was terrifying. The little girl who had just recently smiled at them during the food distribution was now dead. Her place was taken by an evil walking dead. If Elizabeth hadn't mastered secret combat techniques, there could have been one more zombie in the room right now. The girls did not understand how the baby could have become infected in a relatively safe place. The heroine was determined to sort this issue out. When she went outside, the girl saw a crowd of soldiers running past her. Running up to the stopped soldier, Elizabeth reported the infected person in the building. The man immediately asked if there were any wounded. After making sure everything was okay, he said that for some unknown reason, a huge concentration of zombies had been discovered at the point. They managed to report what had happened to Teresa's father, Colonel Liam Rhodes. The discussion of the emerging problem was interrupted by Teresa herself, who burst into the meeting room shouting about monsters. The man said that he knew all of this, and then asked the officer to take his daughter to shelter. Not wanting to give up, Teresa asked for a couple of people to help her rescue. But this, not expecting to be yelled at, the girl froze for a moment. Looking down in disappointment, the rebel noticed a weapon on the soldier standing next to her. A decisive dash, and the weapon is in Teresa's hands. Ignoring her father's cries, the officer's daughter went to save her friends. By this time, James and his team had managed to reach the assembly point. What they saw inside did not inspire confidence. Suddenly an explosion thundered over the city. The guy immediately thought about his girlfriends and set himself the goal of finding them as soon as possible. Turning to his comrades, he ordered them to go to shelter while he went into the city and found out what was going on. James heard Lillian scream behind him, demanding that he return safely. Grace and Elizabeth moved forward with the soldier. He said he could take the girls to a safe place. Noting that the room was empty, the man assumed that the others had already gone to a safe place. Suddenly, a stranger appeared ahead. It turned out to be an old man who was looking for his granddaughter, who had gone missing in the morning. The heroines instantly recognized the man as the grandfather of the girl who had recently appeared at their door. While the grandfather was talking about the girl, a dead man appeared behind him. Having started shooting without warning, the soldier asked the gentleman to step aside. However, it was already too late. The man wondered where so many zombies came from. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemies were distracted by the old man, the soldier ordered the girl to run. But then another monster rushed towards them. Elizabeth realized that things were really bad. Swinging the bat, she hit an unexpected obstacle. The officer thanked her for her assistance, unaware that his fate had already been decided. Death was getting closer and closer. The dead man jumped on the man and sank his rotten teeth into his shoulder. Throwing the monster back, the soldier shot it in the head. Sighing, the man told his charges to get there on their own, since he was no longer their assistant. Left to cover the girls' backs, the guard was left alone with the nightmares. Not wanting to become one of the dead, he cowardly put the gun to his temple and shot himself in the head. But the further path of the beauties turned out to be not easy. While fighting the zombies, Elizabeth shouted to her friend to find a safe place. Distracted, the heroine almost let the monster get close to her. And then the unexpected happened. The only weapon broke. However, help arrived in time. Inspired by this, Elizabeth found the strength to continue the fight. The savior turned out to be Teresa, who reported that she had arrived 100. The girl asked why the assistant decided to take such a risky step. Rolling her eyes, James's former colleague said she didn't need to be thanked. But then Elizabeth noticed movement behind the girl and warned her about it. It turned out that there were 2 monsters running behind her. Realizing that Teresa might not be able to cope on her own, the beauty rushed towards her. A sudden movement and the dead man's life was cut short. My friend was impressed by the skills of that very ancient martial art. Turning her head, Elizabeth ordered the girls not to stand still, but to leave quickly. But everything turned out to be not so simple. The wall broke and a mutant appeared in front of the team. The girls wondered why this zombie was different from the others. Elizabeth told her friend to leave while she detained the dead man. Fearing for the girl, Teresa said it was too dangerous, but the heroine asked them to leave and not distract her. As soon as her friends had disappeared, Elizabeth felt free to act. However, this zombie turned out to be more agile than all those she had encountered before. The monster caught the girl by the leg and threw her into the wall. Thoughts flashed through the heroine's head that this could be her end. While Elizabeth was lying on the floor, a zombie approached her body. But a few steps away from her, something stopped the dead man's movement. It turned out to be a friend's weapon. James came to the girl's aid, wanting to take revenge for her pain. From nowhere, small monsters began to appear at the battle site. The guy's mindset was extremely simple, to destroy everyone, and he saw no reason to deny himself such a need. One by one, the zombies lost their danger. In a couple of minutes, everything was finished. James extended his hand to his friend and informed her that all the monsters had been destroyed. Elizabeth said that she knew where the others were, and called the guy to follow her. Meanwhile, a battle was going on near the shelter. Inside, Grace tried to convince herself that her friend was okay. Suddenly, Bill appeared next to his friends and addressed Teresa. He was surprised that the girl was not hiding behind her daddy, but was walking around here doing nothing. The guy invited her to follow him, as he knew where there was food, shelter, and a way to relax. Later, Bill said that his dad had already arranged a helicopter that would take him to a safe area, and that there were super zombies here. Teresa wondered what the enemy meant by super zombie. Leaning a little closer, the guy suggested they talk in a more secluded place, but his plans were not destined to come true. James angrily asked if the appearance of zombies at the collection point had anything to do with Bill. Seeing their friends, the girls were glad that everything was okay with them, and Bill was unhappy with the fact that James was still alive. Our hero said that if the enemy does not tell the truth, he will soon be among the dead. Frightened, Bill promised to tell everything. As he fell, the guy reported that when his friend showed up at the checkpoint, he soon turned into a zombie, but the villain discovered it in time and hid it, using it as a tool for intimidation. Elizabeth asked why the man had not been found to have an infection upon arrival. Bill suggested that the infection might have been slow to take hold, and that people like him had different checkups. The zombie helped get rid of the interference, but everything went wrong when dealing with the little girl as he escaped. This angered James, who shouted that the Major should have been destroyed earlier. Bill seemed to go crazy and started talking about how wonderful it was to watch an enemy die. But the execution of revenge was interrupted by people's cries about the appearance of a fast zombie. The hero realized that the guy Bill had been using had appeared. Wanting to get rid of the interference, James rushed towards the screams and ordered the others to wait for him here. Elizabeth ran after him, wanting to help and cover her friend's back. In the building outside the shelter, Bill's former friend has chosen a new victim. He braced himself for the jump, but James was faster. The monster was thrown back and was unable to harm the girl. Our hero pointed to the door for the girl and told her to run away. James activated the weapon in his hands. Turning his gaze to the zombie, the guy looked at him with hatred. And then he swung his sword, hoping to send the dead man on his final journey with one blow. However, the monster had already recovered from the blow, and at the last moment he managed to dodge. The monster immediately counterattacked and almost hit James. The speed of the zombies was astounding. The guy couldn't find an opportunity to attack. Looking from one point to another, James could not find the monster. The zombie's assassination plan was thwarted by a rock that hit his head. Hearing a rumble behind him, the hero turned around and was surprised to find the object he was looking for. Having prepared the next projectile, Elizabeth asked her friend to run more slowly next time. As James swung for another attack, he shouted at Elizabeth to move faster. At that moment, the zombie dodged, and the guy missed him again. The monster threw off his obstructing jacket and revealed the spikes on his back. Suddenly, these things turned into weapons that flew towards our hero at the speed of a bullet. Using his inhuman speed, James easily repelled the attack. Realizing that he couldn't cope with the enemy, the zombie decided to take the easier route. He turned and aimed at Elizabeth. Frightened, the girl warned her friend about the monster's actions. James's reaction was immediate. This time the attack was 100% successful. The sword pinned the dead man to the wall, and he couldn't escape. The hero snatched his weapon from the enemy's body in order to use it in battle. Several precise blows right into the monster's body, and the matter was completed. Coming closer to Elizabeth, James informed her that they were returning. Fierce fighting continued in the vicinity of the shelter. When the boys got to the point, they were surprised by the number of zombies. But James always had a solution to this problem. The military fought desperately against the infected. The men were running low on bullets, but salvation was already here. Having killed the dead man, the hero asked where so many undead had appeared near the shelter. The officer reported that it was all because of a rich, dark-haired guy who ran outside and lured the zombies out. James immediately understood who they were talking about. The man bent over and admitted that he felt like he was going to suffocate. The young man warned that these were symptoms of infection and suggested that the soldier see his family. However, the new acquaintance refused, as he had always been an orphan. The man's last words were words of gratitude. James promised himself that he would find Bill and kill him like a dog, but there was no time for despair. It was impossible to let down our guard. Elizabeth came closer and said that the military had come to their aid. These were soldiers from other assembly points. They were commanded by a man who ordered the destruction of all the survivors in the area. He himself had no intention of staying on the sidelines. Not a single dead person escaped the officer's gaze. One by one, the zombies went to hell. Unfortunately, there were many surviving dead people, and they crawled out of the most unexpected places. However, the commander's skills were sufficient to avoid getting hurt himself and to help his subordinates. The monster, which the colonel was able to restrain with his elbow, was eager to fight, and it seemed as if the zombie was about to fulfill his wish. But the man was more agile and faster. Having knocked the enemy to the ground, the commander shot him in the head. The main problem was that the number of monsters was increasing, and they were not allowing you to reload your weapons. The colonel decided to simply defend himself with the barrel, since it was strong enough for this. One zombie still managed to get close to the man, but another man noticed this and dropped his weapon. Teresa's father intercepted the sword, and then he immediately moved into action. When everything was finished, the colonel turned around and saw his assistant. James thanked Mr. Rhodes for his assistance and quick response. Placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, the man acknowledged that the younger generation was breathing down their necks. Liam asked the guys to leave the rest for them and to go to the shelter themselves. Without thinking twice, the guy agreed, and running away, thanked him again for his help. As the young people approached the point, they saw a helicopter. James assumed that someone had come to their rescue. Having run into the shelter, the hero first of all asked where Bill was, and then the guy noticed Teresa's injury. The girl hastened to calm him down, saying that she tried to stop Bill from escaping and received a scratch. James realized that the bastard was running towards the helicopter and decided to catch up with him, no matter what it took. After some time, our hero found the villain, who was confidently running to the roof. It was clear that the guy was barely coping with the dead people pursuing him. Having dealt with his pursuers, the young man ran out onto the roof. He waved his hands joyfully at the helicopter circling above the building. A few seconds later, the person inside threw the ladder out. It turned out to be Bill's father, asking his son to hurry up. The guy had already started climbing, but then something caught his attention. At this time, James ran up to the building. This fact lifted Bill's spirits, and he asked his father for a couple more minutes. Our hero confidently ran through all the obstacles and headed towards the top of the house. As he approached the exit, the young man saw someone's shadow there. He realized that it was Bill who had decided to make a feint, but he was too stupid for such a trick. At this time, the scoundrel heard footsteps and began to act. However, there was no one around the corner. This made the guy feel confused. James took advantage of this and sneaked up behind the traitor, and then offered to feel the zombie's bite. This was followed by a light push in the back, after which Bill flew into the company of those who had gathered there because of him. The boy screamed desperately, hoping to evoke sympathy in James. But this was not a man to be pitied, and our hero understood this. Bill's father watched this whole situation and called for his son with all his might. Realizing that his boy was no longer alive, the man grabbed his weapon. He wanted to make the impudent man pay with his life for what he had done. James barely managed to jump back from the bullets fired by the rich man. The man gave the command to the pilot, and the helicopter began to circle around the roof. After a couple of minutes of futile attempts to find the boy, luck finally smiled on the hunter. Here he fired a new burst of bullets. However, the young man possessed superhuman agility and was able to dodge again. James prepared his weapon and warned that he did not want to fight the man. But since he himself insists on this, the guy has no right to refuse. A precise wave of the hand and the sword hits the helicopter blade. The pilot warned his superior to evacuate because the plane was out of order. Taking the parachute from the worker's hands, Bill's father looked angrily at the boy. In his mind, the man had already come up with several dozen ways to avenge his son. All this time, a fierce battle was going on at the shelter. The results were reported to the colonel. The liquidation was completed successfully. Mr. Rodez glanced at those present and ordered them to go and count the surviving people. At that moment, Victor Blackwood came up and started yelling something about the soldier's inability to protect his son. The man demanded that the offender be brought here within 3 minutes. Otherwise, he would no longer sponsor the supplies. As if expecting these words, James came out from around the corner and announced that there was no need to look for anyone. Victor got angry and promised that he would definitely make the guy regret his birth. But then a crowd of people poured out of the shelter and began to demand that the rich man leave James alone. Teresa said that Bill was harboring zombies at the collection point, and all the horrors that happened were his fault. Elizabeth echoed her friend's accusations and said that if it weren't for James, many more people could have died. The girl's words got the crowd going, and everyone started talking about Bill's inhumanity. Victor didn't like this pressure. Realizing that the people were unhappy, he asked only for the right to kill James, for which he promised to increase supplies 5-fold. These words dampened the fighting spirit of the shelter's population, and timid proposals to agree to the conditions began to be heard from all sides. Inspired by the shouts, Victor pointed his pistol at the hero and asked the colonel to order the soldiers to attack. James's expression changed abruptly, thinking that all this time he had been defending an unprincipled flock of sheep. The young man told Blackwood that his methods were admirable. Turning away, the guy said that he now finally understood how rotten this place was. The major, turning to Liam, demanded that he do something about the troublesome boy. The colonel expressed his attitude to the man's words with one action. Rodez said that everything that was happening was the fault of Victor's son, and if it weren't for James, everyone would be dead. Teresa's father said that if the rich man did not double his supplies, he would immediately end up among the dead. Observing all this, Elizabeth told her friend that she was going to leave with our hero. Her wish was supported by Teresa and Grace. However, Mr. Rhodes had no intention of letting his daughter leave the safety of his home. Not taking the warning seriously, the girl began to grimace and said that she would not stay in this hole. In response to these words, the man's face changed dramatically. The next second, something unexpected happened. The only and beloved daughter received a slap in the face. Liam called out to his subordinate and ordered him to close the rebel. Approaching the man, Elizabeth wanted to say something. However, the colonel asked her not to interfere in family matters. The girl couldn't find an answer to these words. Moving towards Grace, the beauty said that every family has skeletons in the closet. When officers approached Teresa, she did not let them grab her. She shouted to her father that her mother's soul in heaven would never forgive him. To which the man turned away, ordered his daughter to be locked in a punishment cell, and headed away. Our heroes left the shelter without any problems. Their comrades were already meeting them at the gate. Eric asked about their group's plans for the near future. In response, James said that they were leaving here. The car rushed forward confidently. The girls discussed among themselves what had happened at Lillian's brother's cottage. Eric was unhappy with the behavior of the people from the collection point, who so easily handed James over to the rich man for reprisal. But our heroes said that they no longer had anything to do with it, so it was better to close the topic. At that moment, the guy heard alarming sounds. He asked his team to keep their eyes open. And it was the right decision, because an army of zombies swam right in front of them, but James upset her and told her that they were zombies controlled by a mutated giant. Judging by the direction of movement, This entire crowd was heading towards the assembly point. Elizabeth suggested going back and warning the people, to which Eric reacted sharply negatively. James was silent for a few minutes. The girl said that Teresa remained there and could not be buried with the others. These were the decisive words. There was a guard at the checkpoint's watchtower who told the colonel that everything was clear. But this situation changed in a matter of seconds. Not believing his eyes, the man pressed his sights to the scope and pointed it towards the crowd. Convinced that his thoughts were correct, the soldier sounded the alarm. This came as a complete surprise to Mr. Rhodes. He ordered to monitor the movements of the dead and wait for reinforcements. The colonel told the man standing nearby to deploy all remaining soldiers and also to carry out a weapons count. As soon as one soldier left, another burst into the room, shouting bad news. The officer reported that Teresa knocked him out, then stole the gun and ran away. This information upset the colonel even more. Having escaped from captivity, the girl tried to understand in which direction her friends were heading. She walked straight ahead, hoping that they had left her at least some kind of clue. Not far from the shelter, the colonel's daughter saw a car. Teresa assumed that this transport belonged to James and the rest of the guys. However, when she opened the door, the girl saw only a baby and a barely breathing woman. She felt sorry for the child, whose voice had become hoarse from crying. Teresa understood that she could not abandon the baby in trouble. But then her thoughts were interrupted by the child's mother, who had finally turned into a zombie. The heroine had only a few moments to get the baby out of the car, but she didn't have time, so the stolen pistol came into play. Once the cub was in her arms, Teresa decided to return to the shelter. And so, step by step, she returned to where she had escaped with great difficulty. The girl promised herself to find James as soon as she found a home for the baby. And 10 minutes later, the place from which the child was rescued was attacked by monsters. They moved towards the gathering point, led by a mutant brute. From the guard post, the soldiers tried to destroy as many zombies as possible before they reached their territory. Almost all the bullets reached their target, but this was not enough. Some of the dead were found to have new mutations, and this ability made it possible to attack over long distances. Previously, the soldiers had no idea that the infected could change like this. Many monsters did not die after being hit several times. Despite all the surprises, Mr. Rhodes encouraged his subordinates and reminded them of their responsibilities. He ordered that all weapons at their disposal be used. The officers immediately began to carry out the demand. However, the trials were not over. Some zombie managed to organize a stone rain, and everything could have ended sadly if not for our hero. He managed to come to the rescue in time and broke the stones with his sword. Liam immediately rushed to him and asked why the guy had returned. Our hero glanced at the car in which he had just recently driven away from here, and then he reported that on the way they picked up a wounded soldier, and he asked for help. James asked the people to find shelter, and while he distracted the zombies, find a way to kill them all at once. Without arguing with the young man, Liam gave the order for the demolition team to go to the ammunition depot to prepare weapons. The boy praised the man for his plan and asked him to take care of his friends. The colonel promised to fulfill the request, and then demanded that James return safe and sound. The man handed James a timer and warned that in 20 minutes they would blow up the ammunition depot. He asked the young man to lure as many dead people there as possible. As he set out, our hero thought that no problems should occur. A confident swing of the sword, and a wound appears on the zombie's body. Seeing that his friend was doing well, Liam ordered the soldiers to retreat. Meanwhile, James continued to fight the mutant. Realizing that the sword had not done much damage, the boy picked up the spear. Not knowing whether the weapon would help or not, the young man pointed it at his opponent. After making sure that the spear had killed the monster, the hero prepared to attack the rest of the infected. He snatched it from the dead man's body, and with excitement in his eyes chose the next target. Within minutes, the zombies closest to James were destroyed. But everything couldn't be that simple. To restore balance to his body, the boy propped his spear on the ground behind him. He shouted at the zombie that he was underestimating his opponent too much if he was hoping to carry out a sneak attack. A split second and the spear sticks out of the undead's head. The guy thought that although these zombies were good for beating, there were too many of them. He knew it would be bad if the zombies were able to surround him. So, trying to avoid such an outcome, James went on the attack first. A powerful blow swept away half of the opponents. It seemed as if the spear began to instill fear in the dead. Attack! Another attack. And one more thing. There was one undeniable advantage to this battle. James was showered with attributes. Looking brazenly towards the dead men, the guy asked if they still thought he was a match for them. The answer was not long in coming. The character rushed into a new battle without hesitation. He mercilessly chopped down the infected. Their bodies gradually filled the battlefield. The reward was not long in coming. The system gave James the dark sickle of Asura. Not far from her friend, Teresa came out onto a small hill. She was surprised at how quickly the new wave of the dead arrived, and began to think about a way to pass through here unnoticed. And then, Looking closely at the deadly crowd, the girl noticed James. As if sensing the gaze, the young man turned around abruptly. Delighted at being noticed, the rebel waved her hand. Without wasting a second, the guy jumped towards her. Once nearby, James asked how his friend ended up there. In response, she explained that she had gone to look for the team, but along the way she had found a baby and decided to give it a home. Taking the timer out of his pocket, the hero realized that there were 10 minutes left before the explosion. The character quickly picked up Teresa and the child in his arms, as transporting them this way would be much faster. He asked the girl to hold the baby tighter, as they needed to hurry. There was a commotion among the friends in the underground shelter. Eric tried to calm Lillian, who kept asking where her lover was. And the colonel, standing a little to the side from the crowd, was examining something lying in his palm. It turned out that this was a photograph of little Teresa, for whom the man was most worried in the world. Suddenly the ceiling began to collapse. There were sounds coming from above, as if something was deliberately striking. The whole thing was that James, who was running away to a safe place, was being pursued by several giants. Lillian heard the guy's request to open the door and began to panic and ask those around her to do so. But then they fired towards Eric, who was closest to the entrance. It was Victor Blackwood, who with all his heart wished for James's death. Lily said that she was not going to listen to the rich kid, to which he shouted accusations at our hero. Pointing a gun at the girl, the man said that she could not expect a fairy tale rescue. However, the impudent man should not have expected a fairy tale rescue. Liam Rodez saved the shelter from a huge problem. And then the colonel ordered the guys to be sent in, since everything was ready to blow up the ammunition depot. But then James's cry was heard, saying that the situation had changed, and that it was not worth opening the door yet. Outside, the situation was getting tense. The mutant who brought all the zombies here set up an ambush for James. The young man told Teresa to find a safe place for herself while he lured the thug to the warehouse. When the girl began to wonder how the guy himself would be saved, he ordered her to take the child and hide somewhere. Stepping forward, the hero tried to attract the zombie's attention and invited him to play tag. And the next moment, the guy turned around and ran away as fast as he could. Realizing that he had the dead man's full attention, James ordered Teresa to run. When the obstacle was removed, the boy informed the dead man that now only he was his opponent. As if understanding what was being said, the monster roared terribly. Our hero's mood was more serious than ever. The two opponents stood frozen opposite each other. The monster was the first to give in and go on the attack. James calculated the zombie's actions and confidently placed a block in front of him, after which the monster roared and kicked the ground. This action caused the ground around the zombie to become filled with cracks. Hoping that this had distracted the enemy, the dead man launched a new attack. But this only generated excitement and gave me strength. James ran, holding his spear forward. However, the weapon could not withstand the force of the impact. Looking warily towards the enemy, the guy thought that he would save the rifle for a more dangerous situation. Therefore, the choice fell on the dark sickle of Asura. The system reported that when using the sickle, the effect of the special cold attribute is activated, which inflicts freezing. The young man was confused by the fact that the warning was red, but he decided to deal with it later. Realizing that there was no more time to delay, the guy rushed into battle. Teresa managed to run to the entrance of the shelter. She handed the child over to Eric and asked him to look after him. And then she immediately went outside, saying that she couldn't leave James with the zombies. The colonel saw his daughter's actions. Worried, the man tried to stop her, as he understood that the girl was superfluous in the fight against mutants. In response, Teresa stated that she could take care of herself, and was definitely not going to go to certain death. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, reinforcements arrived for the main giant. James, knowing that the lives of his friends depended on him, readily entered the fight. Although the young man was frightened by the number of opponents, he did not want to doubt his own strength. Moving from one dead man to another, the guy confidently eliminated the interference. Looking back, James noted that the cold effect was quite good. The hero's assistant hid behind a rock and decided to watch the fight. After some time, she chose a target and smoothly took aim. For James, the shot at the zombie standing next to him came as a surprise. And Teresa, praising herself for her accuracy, decided to change her position, since it would be stupid to remain in place. The guy tried to figure out who saved his life. He eventually concluded that it was Teresa and admired her courage. The leader of the mutants noted that his pawns were running out and decided to take matters into his own hands. And this is exactly what James was waiting for. After waiting for the monster to get closer, the guy sent 2 zombies in its direction. The giant eliminated the infected in one fell swoop. But our hero was still able to switch the mutant's attention, and he hastened to take advantage of this. A lightning-fast movement, and the monster lost both arms. Feeling weakened, the zombie roared terribly. Expecting a new attack, James wondered out loud how long his opponent would last now. But suddenly the severed hands began to undergo changes. However, our hero did not notice this. as he was attacked by pawns again. Thanks to the sickle, they turned into ice cubes in a matter of seconds. And when the new wave of zombies ended, the guy looked back and saw something terrible. Wanting to prevent another boss from appearing, the young man tried to destroy what was lying on the ground. But his action was interrupted by movement from the side. It turned out that the giant was capable of regeneration. When the zombie attacked, James took a closer look at the new limbs. It turned out that the monster's arms had grown armored. Our hero sets out to find out how many times the monster can regrow its limbs. The opponents clashed in a fierce battle. The sounds of the struggle were so loud that the people in the shelter could hardly bear them. Finally, James waited for the moment when the mutant opened up. A precise movement of the scythe, and the zombie's hand is cut off. But this did not bring any results, since regeneration occurred instantly, and the limb began to grow and turn into an independent monster. And after a couple of seconds, the transformation was complete. Lillian, watching from the window, saw that it would now be twice as difficult for James to win this fight. Turning around, the girl asked the colonel how they could help the guy. The man said regretfully that there was no way for now, since James and Teresa were within the supply depot's blast radius. He said that all that remains is to hope for our hero. Outside, the rebel watched her friend's actions. The heroine thought that the guy could simply be taken by attrition. After checking the magazine, she realized with displeasure that there were only 2 bullets left, and they couldn't just be wasted. James, however, was caught between 2 fires. He came to the conclusion that the double had the same power as the original, and this complicated the situation. The monsters acted tirelessly. The young man felt his strength rapidly diminishing. Dodging another blow, James turned back. And this turned out to be a fatal mistake, as the speed slowed down, and the mutant's fist caught up with the main character. Lillian was terribly afraid for her lover, and Teresa took a few steps towards her friend. But as soon as the dust cleared, James appeared and demanded that everyone remain in their places. Standing on his feet, he admitted that this was the first time his body had suffered to such an extent. But this only added to the excitement. And the mutant that jumped towards the guy didn't scare him at all. James took the fight that had begun as a celebration. I managed to reach the monster's body with the sickle and activate the freezing effect. There is one opponent left. The character said that if the monster wanted to die so much, then he was ready to help him. And at the same time, James noticed that the giant sent the rest of the zombies to attack the shelter. After delivering a quick blow, the guy turned around and ran in the other direction. He understood that he couldn't let the monsters ruin the colonel's plan. At this time, the boss snuck up on James. He hit the main character and saw Teresa in the distance. Feeling fear, the girl fired a bullet into the giant's eye. She managed to hit, but this action angered the zombie, and he ran towards her. The mutant struck, and although it only grazed the girl, she was still hurt. Teresa hit her head hard on the ground when she landed. Lillian, who had been watching the battle all this time, screamed in fear for her friend's life. For James, this became the impetus for decisive action. Flying up to her, the young man began to carefully examine the damage. Without even looking back, the boy stopped the monster's attack. And then turning around, he angrily began to strike blow after blow. As a result, the giant fell to the ground and a small hole formed under him. James reported that by wounding his friend, the infected person signed his own death warrant. And although this was not the first attempt to win, it was different from the others. Anger and the desire for revenge spurred the character on. The guy said that before the mutant dies, he will give everything he has. A determined look and a hand raised in the air. James's hand pierced the monster's chest and grasped its heart. Jumping back, our hero was already 100% sure that this giant would never come back to life. The young man's attention was drawn to a bright blue oval of energy. He rose smoothly upward and approached the former loser's chest. The system reported that James has gained weakness perception. Within range, the ability reveals the location of enemy weak points. Ahead, the young man saw 2 dead men, and signs seemed to glow above their heads. Both zombies belonged to the normal class, and did not have the highest indicators of strength, speed, and intelligence. Realizing that the opponent's stats were negligible, James attacked. With one blow, the guy destroyed both infected. But then a zombie boss, who had an elite class, was resurrected. The value of the monster's attributes was much higher than that of the main character. However, this did not frighten James, as he knew the enemy's weak spot very well. Jumping on the mutant, the guy called on weakness perception, and immediately a mark appeared on the monster, indicating where to strike for greater effect. Attack! But the zombie managed to block the attack. Smiling evilly, James promised that the infected would no longer be able to evade the blow. A dash forward. 2 powerful forces met, and neither gave in to the other. But our hero's rage was stronger. The monster roared loudly. But it was not just a roar, but an unspoken order. The boss directed the entire crowd of his pawns towards the unconscious Teresa. Realizing that he was far away, James risked not being able to help his friend in time. With no more room for error, the boy attacked his main opponent. Having frozen his head, the protagonist ran on, promising the monster that they would continue their conversation. On the way to the girl, the young man no longer paid attention to the crash of the body that fell to the ground. A split second later, James found himself in front of the crowd, which was confidently approaching the helpless Teresa. He took out the first row of infected with freezing, and then the people who broke out of the shelter couldn't stand it any longer and said that they were rushing to help the guy. The colonel shouted for no one to rush forward and took 15 men with him to the ammunition depot. The soldiers began firing to buy James time. Thanks to the defeated monsters, the main character gained experience, but it was not as much as he would have liked. Gradually, the ordinary dead disappeared, but the main mutant was able to free himself from the icy shackles. This meant only one thing: it was time to destroy him completely. James began to swing the sickle quickly. Each blow had a specific direction, and all this was done to create an ice wave. When she caught up with the zombie, she froze his body completely. After some time, the fragment became covered with cracks and flew apart. The monster fell to the ground and showed no further signs of life. Even though it was difficult, James defeated the giant. It wasn't easy to beat the enemy, but he also dropped a lot of attributes. A crazy idea came to the guy's head: to breed similar monsters in order to receive rewards from them. But in the end, he rejected it. The soldiers' spirits were lifted when they saw that the main mutant was no longer there. James also received a restorative potion in his inventory, which heals non-fatal wounds. The guy decided to give the medicine to Teresa, since she had some credit for defeating the big guy. And then the colonel called the young man, ordering him to go to the bomb shelter. James's gaze fell on his friends, and he saw their characteristics, and the most deplorable ones were those of the rebel. The guy ordered them to go to shelter, promising to deal with the remaining zombies himself. Looking angrily at her lover, Lillian said that she would wait for him in the shelter. Smiling radiantly, the young man asked the girl not to worry, and then, turning to the infected, he joyfully began to call them to him. He asked if the monsters thought he was tasty. Judging by the zombies' faces, they thought it was the most delicious thing on the planet. And the former people ran towards him, as if they had been waiting for such words. The protagonist activated weakness perception, and realizing that everyone had the same weak spot, he struck it with a sickle. James reduced the number of dead with each swing of his weapon. He realized that such a trifle no longer posed a threat to him. At this time, another giant approached the ammunition depot. As if someone had told him about the colonel's plans, he began to try to get inside. After a couple of minutes, the zombie managed to break down the door and was given a warm welcome inside. The soldiers realized that they could no longer hold off the enemy, and they communicated this by radio. Through the crack in the door, people saw another wave of zombies approaching them. The officer monitoring the situation assumed that James had failed, but turning his gaze slightly to the side, he realized that something was happening in the crowd of zombies. Having increased the zoom, the man reported that the guy was fine. James knew that if he was late, Commander Rodez and his soldiers could be in serious danger. Having finished with the small change, the young man approached the giant and immediately saw his weak spot. Without wasting any time, the boy swung at the infected man and cut his back with the sickle. The monster roared loudly and then closed its eyes forever. The colonel's personnel watched everything that was happening with horror. Throwing his weapon over his shoulder, James reported that the mission had been completed and that all zombies were being directed in that direction. Upon hearing the report, the man shouted for everyone to head to the bomb shelter. 5 minutes later, a bright glow from the explosion rose into the sky. A terrible roar was heard throughout the entire area, and the number of infected people was decreasing. Teresa received medical attention. Liam, seeing that James blamed himself, asked him not to do this, because if it weren't for him, everyone present would already be dead. In response, the guy handed over a bottle of medicine and told her to give it to the girl. The man began to look at what was offered with surprise. The hero admitted that it was a fast-acting medicine that he found in an abandoned supply vehicle. The colonel wasn't stupid and knew there were no cars nearby, but he trusted James and wasn't going to argue with him. Liam narrowed his eyes and admitted that he had previously been biased against James and apologized for it. Standing up, Mr. Rhodes began pouring medicine into his daughter's mouth, and then thanked the boy for the chance to recover. James, who saw people's stats, noted how the girl's indicators went up, but suddenly the system reported that for an ordinary person, Teresa had super powerful physical strength. The main character was perplexed by what was happening, but he couldn't share it with anyone. And the next moment the rebel opened her eyes. The colonel immediately rushed to her and began to anxiously ask about her health. Suddenly, the system hid all of the girl's characteristics from James. Meanwhile, Teresa looked at her father with incomprehension, and the next moment she pushed him away and asked who he was. The girl demanded that the man move away from her, since they were strangers. Liam shockingly stated that he was the victim's father. Wanting to somehow defuse the situation, James leaned forward a little and said that Teresa might have memory loss due to severe shocks. And then, as soon as the girl saw the main character, her pupils dilated, as if she saw a deity. Forgetting all her ailments, Teresa jumped on the guy with hugs. A strange comparison for the events that were taking place popped into the colonel's head. When the rebel got rid of her victim, she asked if he was James Garden. The boy's eyes widened in surprise and he exclaimed that his memory was returning, then pointed his finger towards the colonel and asked who it was. Having hugged the hero, Teresa declared that the person standing in front of her was a bad person. James tried to calm Liam down by reminding him of his daughter's head injury. The young man offered to leave the girl with him temporarily, promising to ensure her safety. With a heavy sigh, the colonel admitted that this was the only correct option. The next day, Mr. Rodas once again offered to let the team stay with them and head west. But James refused, as he wanted to find traces of his parents and save them. Resigned, Liam asked the boys to call him via satellite phone if the need arose. To avoid wasting time on a long goodbye, the young people jumped into their cars and quickly started them. The shelter's inhabitants saw the heroes off with joyful cries. When Eric suggested staying a little longer, James shook his head and said that it was not necessary. The guy thought to himself that in the current circumstances, the aura of honor would only become a burden for him. Half a day later, the group decided to get out of the cars to stretch their legs. Eric, without wasting any time, checked the house next door and reported that it was clean. Seeing the wary looks of his comrades, James called them to him, informing them that they would make a stop here. Grace said she could cook dinner for everyone if the local cuisine was suitable. After some time, Eric approached James and said that this house was perfect for defense, and why the residents left it was unclear. The hero suggested that they might have gone in search of their family members. And then the guy reminded them that despite the times they live in, they should maintain their humanity. But he didn't finish the sentence, since everything was clear. Grace kept her promise. The entire group admired the dishes and tried to fill their stomachs to the maximum. Meanwhile, night fell outside the window. One mutated infected appeared on the street. But then angry animals appeared on the horizon. Oddly enough, they were also infected. Despite the fact that there was the same zombie in front of them, the monster knocked it down with its huge horns. The sounds outside attracted our company as well. The animals managed to surround the house in which living people were hiding. Eric looked out the window and reported that they had another problem. Watching the mutants slowly make their way into the courtyard, James said that they were here for their souls. The former bandit suggested hiding in the basement and waiting until the animals went away. Standing frozen at the door, the guy told everyone to get ready, because the fun was about to begin. Suddenly, the infected's head appeared in the open window. Teresa, so as not to attract the monster's attention, covered her mouth with her hands. It seemed as if the buffalo did not see people and was guided only by smells and sounds. But suddenly Tobias, coming to the window, told James in a loud voice that these animals were not so smart, and this was precisely the mistake. The boys realized that now a battle could not be avoided. Hearing the call of one of the herd, the rest of its members rushed forward. The entire group scattered, hoping to finish off the infected if possible, and the mutants were already inside. Eric and Tobias, having grabbed machine guns in their hands, had already entered the battle. Fragile Lillian began to fight with a sword, but suddenly a huge buffalo approached her from behind. Elizabeth immediately came to the girl's aid and destroyed the danger. Running up to her friend, the girl from an ancient family praised her for an excellent attack. Eric fearlessly single-handedly destroyed the mutants closest to him. James casually noted the coherence of his comrades' actions. And then he immediately began to fight, because he did not want to lag behind his friends. He mercilessly chopped down the monsters, forgetting about controlling the rest of the group. And as it turned out, it was in vain. Teresa was in danger, but then a bullet hit the buffalo's head and killed him. The colonel's daughter received assistance from Grace, who managed to get her bearings and make an aimed shot. Teresa, without thanking the girl for saving her, threw herself into James's arms with hysterical screams. Grace noted the fact that the rebel had too much speed for an ordinary person. Our hero noticed this too, but when he tried to call up the girl's characteristics, the system again refused to show him the numbers. 2 hours later, a small group was able to destroy an entire herd of mutated buffalo. James, after looking at his stats after the battle, came to the conclusion that his stats were now growing too slowly. When all the friends gathered nearby, the guy praised them for their excellent coordination in their actions. But then his attention was caught by a flash that occurred not far from their location. The system gave our heroes a nice surprise. It turned out to be the fire unicorn, whose fired projectiles have a fire effect and a double-shot function. James decided to give the machine gun to Eric and heard someone calling him from behind. It turned out to be a small group of people who thanked him for saving them. The boy rushed to the old man who was in front of everyone and began asking him to get up from his knees. In response, a local resident said that buffaloes had taken over their village and were eating one of them every day. People were surprised that such a small group was able to save them from a deadly threat. After all, if it weren't for James and his friends, everyone present could have soon died due to supplies running out. Our hero looked at those around him with sadness. Turning around, the boy ordered Eric to bring some of the supplies and give them to the residents. The man tried to object, but in response received only a menacing repetition of the request. Having received boxes of provisions, the villagers could not believe their luck. But then the old man looked up and saw that they had not been given everything, and this thought did not give him peace. However, out loud the elder only thanked him for the help provided, trying not to reveal his envy. James didn't notice anything suspicious, and, after saying goodbye to the people, said that it was time for them to return. That same evening in a temporary shelter, James slept peacefully, hugging Teresa. But the sleep was light, and hearing rustling sounds in the street, the guy opened his eyes. At this time there really were guests at the house. The same old man who was helped in the morning said that he informed the local gang about this gang. In exchange, the bandits warmed him up with food and let him use the girl. The scoundrel didn't think we were doing anything wrong, as he was worried about the amount of supplies our heroes had. James, who saw the people from the window, jumped to the ground and immediately approached them. Realizing that they had been caught off guard, the deceiver began to apologize. He immediately came up with a version that he had been talking with a friend about the ceremonial farewell they wanted to arrange for the hero. Surprised, the young man said that there was no need for this, and asked the villagers to go home for their own safety. Delighted that they were so easily believed, the men did not linger. But they didn't see the suspicious look the guy gave the guests as he said goodbye. The next day, the convoy moved on. Eric couldn't stop thanking his boss for the excellent weapon. But then there was a shout to stop, as there was a gas station ahead. The guys decided to split up and search everything here for anything useful. The former bandits approached the truck with boxes and immediately climbed inside. What he discovered surprised Eric. The boxes were filled to the brim with food. Lillian wondered out loud at the amount of food that was lying unattended at the gas station. Glancing to the side, the guy saw a landing sign. Elizabeth's cry came from above, announcing that she had found the weapons that had been airdropped. This news left James even more confused. But then the understanding of what was happening slowly began to dawn on him. The young man told everyone that it was an ambush. And at that very moment, a burst of automatic fire swept through the truck. The men inside jumped out and ran for cover. Eric, noticing the boss nearby, called him over. The comrade noted that the enemy had too much combat power and asked what they would do. Suddenly, someone from the western side also opened fire. Dodging the gunfire, James reported that they were surrounded on all sides. Our hero used swords to protect himself from the bullets flying at him. Turning around, he told his friends to run towards the supermarket while he drew the enemy's attention to himself. Left alone, James suggested that people with guts come out to him. But in response, a shot was fired from a nearby building. However, the enemy revealed himself in this way. The guy swung and threw the sword into the window from which the bullet had come. When the attack stopped, James realized he had hit the target. He ordered his group to go inside. But then a new attack began. The young man confidently deflected the bullets flying at them. Jumping high into the air, the guy flew into the building through the window. And then he was immediately surrounded. Feeling the tension inside, the hero activated the weapon in his hand. With one wave of his hand, James was able to scatter all the participants of the attack. Looking in shock at their frozen hands, the men could not understand what kind of weapon was used against them. But then a male voice was heard asking James to lower his weapon. A stranger came out from around the corner and asked if our guys were Cooper's people. The guy asked why they first opened fire and then started talking. The man said they had mistakenly identified them as one of 4 factions that were after a shipment of ammunition. James asked if this meant that the shooters from the west did not belong to the stranger's gang. After some time, the man said that he was the chairman of the Damien Cross concern. It turned out that, besides them, there are 3 more groups that are baring their teeth at the dropped ammunition. The Donggong holds many girls captive in their territory, and Zhuge is a security firm for the transport. Damien's windows overlook the territory of the Triad, which has a ferocious disposition, but nothing has been heard from them lately. The man said that he was ready to give the weapon to James, but the hero said that he was not ready to trust the gang leader so quickly, and asked to be taken to Dunn so that he could verify what was said. Having approached the desired building, the young man immediately entered inside, and what he saw inside was very shocking. The girls were kneeling on the floor, and a bunch of scum were watching them from the balcony. Each captive had a bowl of food in front of them, and none of them had cutlery. Second floor of the warehouse. The 2 beauties asked if the bandit was satisfied with their recent service, to which they received a positive answer. Dunn hugged the girls one by one and admired their appearance. And then he said that after long games he starts to get tired of it all. Looking up at his subordinate, the man asked why the chicks from the motorcade weren't here yet. A gang member promised to check out the situation, but behind him came an order not to touch the Hummer. which the leader had taken a fancy to. However, the pawn didn't even have time to run out into the corridor. James came inside and asked who dared to attack his group. Dunn, instantly angry, shouted in displeasure and asked why the strangers had broken into his territory. In response, our hero smiled and innocently said that he had come to demand an explanation for the recent attack. But the man said that he was ready to spare the guy's life if he left his chicks here and went away. Unwilling to tolerate insolence, the young man silently went on the attack. Shots were immediately heard from the enemy side. However, James had superpowers on his side. He gripped the sickle with both hands for convenience, and then he began to use it so confidently, as if the weapon were an extension of his hand. The bandit didn't understand where an ordinary guy got such skills from. When all the machine guns were frozen, the protagonist asked how their weapons were now better than an ordinary poker. But enemy reinforcements were not long in coming. The men rushed forward in a crowd, wanting to destroy the uninvited guest. James's friends came to his aid, and although they were not as strong as their boss, they also knew how to do something. Feeling that he was losing, Dunn rushed to the exit, promising his brothers to bring reinforcements. Eric chuckled and told James to go after the scumbag, promising to deal with the local riffraff. Watching the man go, the boy promised that he wouldn't go far. However, Dunn had no idea that his time was coming to an end, and the appearance of a pursuer behind him came as a complete surprise to him. Without thinking, the bandit opened fire on our hero, but this target was too clever to be hit so easily. The man decided to use the last trump card he had in reserve. Suddenly, a secret passage opened under the young man's feet. In a flash, James is flying down, realizing that he has nothing to cling to. Below, a crowd of hungry dead people awaited him. Above, the passage doors closed with a loud bang. Dunn was already prepared to celebrate his victory and looked at the hatch with triumph in his eyes. However, the joy was premature. The bandit began to nervously twitch his leg and demand that James let him go. The hero had the opposite opinion on this matter, and he made every effort to ensure that the villain ended up under the floor with him. Realizing where this was all leading, Dunn screamed even louder. A second later, the man was already hanging upside down and looking at the zombies in horror. He made one last attempt and promised James that he could take whatever he wanted. Smiling, the guy said that the enemy came to his senses too late, and then he released the hand that was holding the bandit. A crowd of people wanting to dine on Dunn immediately formed around him as he fell to the floor. Meanwhile, the girls tried their best to calm the former captives. Watching from the sidelines, Lily said she doubted the ladies' ability to continue surviving on their own. James sadly said that during the end of the world, they can only look after themselves, so the girls will have to find their own way. Turning her gaze to the guy, the beauty pointed out that some of the captives were naked and asked him to watch where he looked. At that moment, a stranger wrapped in some kind of rag approached them. Feeling embarrassed, James said that they should leave some of the resources for the poor guys. Following her lover's gaze, Lily grew angry and with a threatening voice, reminded him of her warning. And then the guy felt for himself what it means not to fulfill requests. The girl sadly asked why guys can only think with the lower half of their bodies. Proceeding to the Eastern District, James came across a building that housed another faction. As he got closer, he heard women's voices asking him to stop. Without further ado, the guy kicked down the door, realizing that his help was needed there. But inside he saw something he didn't expect. The girls were kneeling before him and joyfully greeting him. They walked towards James, extending their hands towards him. One of the strangers, dropping the hero on the floor, asked him to enjoy her. The thought flashed through the young man's head that he was sleeping. But then one detail caught my eye. All the girls had collars with numbers hanging around their necks. This brought James to his senses and, moving back, he ordered the beauties not to touch him. Tired of the staged performance, the guy called on the gang leader, Zhugu, to show himself. The next moment, loud laughter reached the protagonist's ears. A skinny man emerged from the darkness and assumed that their guest was unhappy with the girls. Zhugu kindly said that James was a hero because he was able to finish off his mortal enemy. The young man assumed that the bandit wanted to bribe him with the help of these girls. Zhugu chuckled and said that this was a reward for victory and nothing more. Turning to the strong man, the man ordered that these women be killed and replaced with another group. Hearing what awaited them, the beauties fell to their knees and began to beg for mercy. James was surprised and asked why these people treated other people's lives this way. In response, the leader joyfully spread his arms and announced that after the end of the world, human life means nothing. The man said that if the guy joins them, he is ready to share with him everything that is here. With a sharp movement, Zhugu pulled one of the girls closer to him, and then he declared that he and James could become princes, and any skin would be at their feet. Raising an eyebrow, the young man asked if this was the bandit's goal. Without waiting for an answer, the guy said that he was not at all interested in such a life. The headman's face immediately changed, and he asked if the guest was sure he didn't want to act in a good way. James said he didn't want to be around people who did that to other people. Juga asked not to blame him for the lack of hospitality. The next moment, our hero and all the girls were covered by a huge cage. Suddenly, all the captives grabbed their throats and began to choke. James ran up to the bars and asked with displeasure what was happening to the slaves. The man said that they had been infected with a virus in advance and that they would turn into zombies any minute. And then the girls began to lose their human appearance. The strangers began to beg James to let himself be bitten, because in this case, the owner promised to give an antidote. Looking sadly at the future zombies, the guy said that they trusted the wrong person. Suddenly, he was attacked by a girl whose transformation had ended earlier than the others. The young man ruthlessly destroyed the danger, as he understood that there was nothing he could do to help it. And then James freed the remaining captives from their torment. Having dealt with the main opponents, the guy switched to the cage. Having got outside, the young man announced that all the bandits were finished. Frightened, Juga ran away, ordering his guards to finish off their guest. The men immediately opened fire on James, but they didn't expect him to be so fast. In an instant, the guy was able to reach the offenders and deal with them. Having made sure that no one would attack him from behind, the main character called him to him. Appearing on the stairs with a powerful weapon, the man answered in the negative. James chuckled and said that the bandit wouldn't be able to defeat him with that toy. But then there was laughter, and Juga declared that the thing was loaded with a signal flare smeared with blood, which would attract all the zombies in the area. The villain demanded that the guy free him, otherwise he would launch a projectile and none of our hero's company would be saved. The young man suggested testing which would be faster, his weapon or Juga's hand. But life had its own plans. The former captive sank her teeth into the bandit's neck, and he began to lose his balance. Unfortunately, the man's finger was on the trigger of the gun the whole time. A moment before the disaster, our hero noticed this, but it was already too late. The explosion and the scent of blood made the dead man turn his gaze towards where the people were. All the zombies changed their trajectory and headed towards the enchanting smell. Coming out onto the roof, James and Tobias saw a crowd of infected approaching. The protagonist said that it was too late to retreat, and that they needed to prepare for battle. Coming out to his new acquaintances, the guy reported the enemy's approach. Damien Cross was ordered by James to take all the girls and hide in a secluded place until further notice. The zombies were approaching the shelter. Part of the group of infected people passed by a fuel tanker. Tobias took advantage of this and shot at the car. The next moment, an explosion was heard, which thinned the ranks of monsters. Realizing that the enemy's numbers had dwindled, Eric led his men into battle. And a couple of minutes later, James joined them. He fought the zombies confidently, destroying them in groups at once. The fat man who was watching the fight from the roof was impressed by his boss's abilities. The sickle flew into the air and took the last of the life from the bodies of the dead. And although James destroyed enough infected, few characteristics fell into his piggy bank. Suddenly, heavy footsteps were heard from behind. It turned out that an elite fighter with impressive stats had joined the zombie army. The young man thought that this enemy must be capable. Meanwhile, the giant immediately went on the attack. Our hero barely managed to jump away from the place where the enemy's weapon landed. James understood that such a powerful blow could turn an ordinary person into a pancake. Wanting to help his friend, Tobias fired a burst of machine gun fire into the monster's back. But he managed to put his hammer forward and cover his body from wounds. The guy was surprised by the speed of the zombie's reaction. The monster decided to take revenge on the attacker and rushed to the gas station. Our hero couldn't allow this monster to reach such an important object. Bounce. And now our hero confidently flies up to the enemy, but then he immediately encounters resistance. The force of the mutant's blow sent James flying backwards and losing his weapon. The guy flew backwards into the back of the truck with all his might. The former bandits who were watching the boss were very afraid for his safety. And then the system reported that James had unlocked the ability Iron Bone. 1 hit, 1 improvement. The protagonist realized that he could improve after being beaten. Getting up from the ground, the young man confidently walked towards the monster. He beckoned his opponent with his finger, demonstratively throwing his sickle over his shoulder. The dead man did not keep us waiting long. The enemy brought his hammer into action and was able to knock James away again. But that was all our hero needed, as the system notified him of a new level of strengthening of the Iron Bone. The men did not understand why their comrade allowed himself to be touched. James returned to the zombie and reported that this blow was much weaker than the previous one. Since this infected person had a high intelligence, he understood the man's claim. The monster immediately decided to correct his mistake and attacked the impudent man. Even though the guy defended himself, he still suffered, and so the system raised the level to 3rd. At some point, Tobias decided that his friend had decided to die, but Eric refuted this theory. James continued to give in and increase his resistance to punches. After one of the next blows, the men began to doubt whether their boss was still alive. After the attack, dust rose around the dead man and nothing could be seen. But it was all worth it, as James upgraded the Iron Bone to the maximum. Seeing that the man was still alive, the infected man growled terribly, and the guys were very happy that their comrade was okay. Iron Bone makes the body invulnerable for a short period of time, lasts for 1 second, and is restored after 600 seconds. The process of acquiring the ability affected the hero's health, and he was transferred to the recovery chamber. Having moved into the capsule, James thought that if it weren't for this ability, today would have been the end for him. After its last use, the camera was in recovery mode because it had consumed too much power. After some time, the guy returned to the battlefield. The boy's intention was simple: to avenge the injuries inflicted on him by the infected, and he began to put his plan into action. While getting to the zombies, James activated the Iron Bone. As soon as the hero reached the monster, a sledgehammer immediately fell on him. But thanks to his new abilities, the young man was not harmed, but merely removed the weapon like an annoying fly. The next moment there was a counterattack, and the guy was able to reach the enemy. Elizabeth noted that James had become even stronger in a short period of time. The hero came from behind his enemy and dealt him the decisive blow. Finally, it was all over. The infected James's good stats dropped, but then a golden glint caught the guy's eye from the side. It turned out that the zombie had dropped not only stats, but also a chest. However, no matter how hard the young man tried, he was unable to open his prize. A day later, our hero told Damien that he had asked Colonel Rhodes to send soldiers for him and his men, who would take them to a safe place. The man thanked the boy for his concern and said that as a reward, he would give the young man all the weapons. After everyone had said goodbye to Damien, James announced that they were ready to move on. Sometime later, the heroic group reached the viaduct. The boys decided that they should take a rest before setting off on their journey again. Elizabeth reported that she heard on the radio that new Lord-level zombies had appeared at the Debbie Mountain base, but there was an alien retinue there. This news surprised James, and he decided to find out about the monster's ranks. At that moment, Eric ran up to them and said that he knew more about this than anyone else. The guy explained that depending on the degree of alienization, zombies are divided into normal, elite, mutated, and lords. Experts say that if the current trend of alienization continues, there will be more Lord-level mutants. Eric said that he was not sure about the aliens, but he heard that they all came with the end of time. Turning to the girl, James asked if she knew about this. Elizabeth lifted her chin and said that her family was involved in martial arts and had no way of knowing about aliens. Having rested, the group set off on their journey. The young man was amazed that it was snowing outside. Still not having come to her senses, Teresa clung to the guy and said that he was very warm. The girl's actions had consequences. The steering wheel in James's hands jerked. Elizabeth looked out the window excitedly and asked what had happened. Hearing his friend's question, the hero hastened to assure her that everything was fine. Realizing that this would not end well, James went outside and said that he wanted to explore the area. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, who remained in the car, saw a snowflake fall onto her palm. After examining it more closely, the girl wondered if it could be a creation of aliens. The young man walked a little further away from the convoy and was surprised by the number of ice sculptures he discovered. They looked quite realistic. Suddenly, Teresa appeared from the side and suggested making a snowman. James asked with displeasure not to make him laugh, because this was too strange a place for entertainment. A cracking sound was heard from the side. The guy turned around sharply and tried to find the source of the sound. Silly Teresa, without fear, approached the figures and began to admire their sophistication. And then James realized what the catch was. He shouted at the girl not to touch those monsters, but it was too late. The silly girl was saved again by our hero's reaction. The guy destroyed the ice zombies that were closest to Teresa and ordered her to hide behind him. James had never heard of infected that looked like sculptures before. To prevent all this time, the group was watched by a stranger who hoped to sacrifice our heroes to the god of the last days. The guys didn't need to be told several times, they responded immediately to the boss's words. Eric, feeling cold, asked Elizabeth if she was cold and received a negative answer. The thing was that James not only got rid of the virus, but also strengthened her physical abilities. After some time, the ice mutants were destroyed. The guy was surprised at how easy it was to defeat these zombies. Suddenly, a block of ice flew towards the hero, but he quickly realized what was happening and cut the danger off before his very eyes. At that moment, the stranger decided to reveal herself and offered to join her organization and follow the god of the end of time. In response, James said that now one can only believe in oneself, and he himself was mentally surprised by the telepathic abilities of his opponent. Angered, the blonde said that her abilities were granted by her god of the end times. Going on the attack, the girl said that since the fighters did not want to join, they would have to become food for God. The guy asked how God, who saves people, can take human life, and then he offered to help expose the religious deception. But the stranger did not even want to listen to her opponent. She relentlessly used her abilities and attacked the guy with blocks of ice. James also decided to use the elemental powers available to him. Using all his speed, the hero swung his weapon. Using a sickle, the boy created a shield that took the entire blow. The girl noted that this was the first time she had encountered an opponent who possessed ice powers. The young man invited the girl to stop fighting and join his team. But she said that only her god was capable of saving the world without measuring himself. And then she launched a powerful attack at James. Suddenly, the icy energy began to transform into peaks. Realizing that the situation was critical, the hero activated the iron bones. For a second, the battlefield was silent as the ice swallowed James. In a moment, the entire structure flies apart. Smiling, the hero asked if the girl had finished using her abilities. The fact that the enemy remained unharmed surprised the blonde. But then, this angered the stranger, and she decided to fix the problem. Looking sternly at the deceased, the girl said that she did not need to be told what to do. There was an unremarkable building nearby, but horrors were happening inside him. The man, standing in front of the huge infected, promised that Daddy would deliver fresh meat in a couple of minutes. Coming a little closer to his rival, James asked why she killed her companion. The girl admitted that if she were as soft-hearted as the guy, her companion would have killed her long ago. And the next moment she jumped up, wanting to continue the battle. Two forces collided, and neither gave in to the other. All this time, Elizabeth had been watching the battle, and the girl's silhouette seemed painfully familiar to her. And then she recognized her opponent as her sister, Mary Parker. She panicked and shouted to her friend not to touch the girl. The guy had no choice but to fulfill Elizabeth's request, and Mary glanced at her relative with displeasure. James's friend immediately ran up to her sister and tried to hug her. But the girl did not allow this to happen, saying that she did not have a sister. Feeling the blank stare, Elizabeth said it was her family's fault. This happened in childhood. Mary had the ability to control the powers of ice and snow. The family had no way to control supernatural powers, and Elizabeth did not dare teach her sister ancient martial arts. The girl was afraid that the baby would suffer because of her abilities and become a demon. Suddenly, Mary did not understand the family's intentions, left home, and has been missing ever since. Angered by her older sister's explanations, the girl shouted that Elizabeth was afraid of becoming weaker than her sister. While watching the relatives argue, James explained that the other woman had been brainwashed and had joined the cult of the god of the end times. There was another witness to what happened, the sniper who decided that Mary had betrayed them. He fired because he believed it would be fair to offer the traitor's death to God. But the main character managed to save the girl. Feeling her cheeks blush with embarrassment, the Ice Princess thanked the guy. Jumping up, he reminded his companion that there were still enemies here. The man with the scope couldn't understand where the ordinary guy got such speed from, and a crowd of followers of the cult of the god of the end times descended on our heroes. James felt sorry for the bunch of brainwashed people, but they left him no choice. The young man quickly dealt with the attackers, trying to awaken at least someone from zombification. But it was all in vain. Mary explained that the followers promised her even more power if she believed in God. James decided to look at the traitors and ask them for an explanation. Feeling angry at her sister, Elizabeth impatiently demanded to know everything about the cult. The man said that the god of the end of the world was beyond our company's reach, and that sooner or later they would be punished. And then he bit into a pill that contained a huge dose of poison. The heroes could only marvel at the extent of the cultists' brainwashing. James approached Mary and asked about the number of people in the organization and their boss. In response, she said that there were about 200 of them, and the boss was the divine ambassador. That same night in a safe place, lying on his bed, James thought about how ridiculous the doomsday god religion was. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. The guy asked Mary what happened. Blushing, the girl explained that she had learned from Elizabeth about a secret that could strengthen her. The young man was shocked by how much the sisters told each other everything. He began to worry that if his abilities became known, he would become a toy for girls. James said that he could help Mary, but she would have to keep it a secret. Overjoyed, the new girl promised not to tell anyone anything. The guy asked if the girl was ready, and received a positive answer. He tried to relax the ice cube as much as possible, and then he fulfilled her request. After some time, the young man asked how Mary was feeling. Seeing that he had confused his friend with his question, he asked if she felt stronger. Having come to her senses, she decided to test her abilities right away. However, there was only a quick flash, and then everything disappeared. James decided to check the data through the system, but it also showed nothing. The guy said that this was the first time he had encountered something like this, since everything had always worked before. The hero suggested that this was not enough, and perhaps it was worth repeating again. After his second attempt, James said he tried really hard this time. The girl said that the guy would have to protect her until his strength returned. The hero quickly agreed to this, and then asked to be taken to the location of the sect, which is what Mary did the next day. She said that this was one of the meeting places for the attack group. James asked if the god of the end of the world was hiding here, but they didn't have time to answer him because they were attacked from the entrance, and the group had to enter into battle since no one was going to resolve the issue amicably. One of the followers began to urge Mary to surrender and become food for God. At that moment, the bullet finally reached our heroes. The bullet flew through Teresa. This angered James, and he began to deal with his opponents with twice the ferocity. Having eliminated the threat, the guy ran up to Teresa, and having made sure that the dream was alive, told her that she needed help. A new girl approached the guys and said that she knew a thing or two about medicine. While unconscious, the girl kept calling for James. The guy came to visit his friend and asked Mary how she was feeling. Elizabeth's sister said she was able to stop the bleeding from the bullet, but the victim requires treatment at a nearby hospital. The young man doubted the existence of a hospital, since human life is now cheaper than paper. Hoping that his medical camera could help, James asked Mary to support the wounded woman for another 3 days. The comrades who approached reported that there were no traces of the sect in the entire building, but Eric saw several people heading to the factory nearby. This news encouraged James, and he said that they should check everything out. An unknown man tried to escape from ice monsters. It seemed like they were about to catch up with him, but suddenly the infected stopped. They growled angrily, but made no attempt to approach the man. This scene was also observed by the guys who did not understand why the dead men did not finish their work. Meanwhile, the fugitive approached the guards, who were in no hurry to let him through. One of them asked the man how he survived the end of the world. Throwing his hands up, the man said that he dedicated everything to the god of the end of the world. This was the code phrase after which the sectarian passed inside without any problems. Our heroes also decided to try their luck, and approached the men and said that they were new, but could use code words. They looked at the sentries with all seriousness, waiting for the control question. But the question was different. The guard demanded to name 3 oracles of the god of the end of the world. There was only silence in response. Eric asked with displeasure why the code word had changed, and James tried to justify their ignorance by saying that they were new, and only knew the answer to the question of how to survive at the end of the world. The servant said that people who do not know the names of the oracles do not have the right to enter the Holy of Holies, and ordered them to leave. After moving away, the guys conferred and decided that in this case they could only use force. Sometime later, having dealt with the guards, the young people began to wonder what kind of security there might be inside the building. James headed inside and asked Erica to meet their group at the other entrance. The divine messenger preached to the followers of the god of the end of the world. The crowd furiously repeated the name of their deity, and the hero, observing everything from the side, was surprised at how easy it was to deceive people. Meanwhile, the man announced that it was time to choose the next victim. But this did not frighten anyone. Each of those present was ready to give their body to God. James liked what was happening less and less. The Lord Envoy roared that now they all needed to hear the voice of their creator. And the next moment it was as if something hit the wall and pieces of concrete started flying off it. Our hero was surprised by the monster's power, because even the zombies found outside were afraid of him. The sectarians asked the man what the god of the end of the world says, and the light fell on the young girl, and then the messenger announced that the choice had fallen on her. This made the monster's future victim happy, even though she realized that these were her last minutes. The chosen one was escorted into a room where her hands were tied and she was forced to her knees. A few moments later, a huge inhuman leg appeared from the darkness. The people standing nearby were hit by a wave of force, and they barely managed to stay on their feet. The owner of the leg was an infected person, fattened to an unimaginable size. The victim looked in surprise at the one she had been worshipping for some time. The monster roared again, dousing the cultist with a wave of sound and the stench that emanated from its mouth. The girl, feeling fear creeping up on her, asked God to enjoy her body, and then James appeared in front of her, who could not allow a stupid death. The guy said that this is not God, but an elite zombie who has the ability to create a powerful sound wave. Our hero urged the stranger to take a closer look at what she considered a deity, and then he ordered her to run away. The system showed James that his opponent was strong enough and that defeating him would not be easy. The guy attacked his legs first to make it harder for the monster to get to him. The blow reached its target, but the answer was not long in coming. The guy realized that the monster had a wide range of attacks, and getting closer to it would be difficult. However, this did not make him give up. The infected noticed the enemy and overtook him with a sound wave. At that moment, someone opened fire on the monster's leg. It turned out that some guys came to the rescue and were able to get through the sectarians. The young man explained about the sonic attacks, and then asked to distract the zombies. The former bandits immediately began to carry out the boss's orders. In response, the infected redirected its attack towards them. The waves instantly reached the guys and threw them back. It looked harsh from the outside, and for a moment James felt ashamed that his comrades had taken the brunt of it. Unexpectedly for the monster, he was attacked from behind. This time, The girls began to distract the infected by shouting loudly and shooting at the enemy. Our hero took advantage of this and jumped towards the zombie, swinging his sickle. The attack was successful, and a new wound appeared on the monster's body. But the negative consequences were not long in coming. Freeing his hands from the chains, the dead man roared triumphantly. The force with which the monster freed its hands also affected the walls of the cave. The stone began to crumble on our heroes, threatening to leave them here forever. In the next room, the messenger tried to convince the sectarians that these sounds did not mean that the building was collapsing. He said that it was God who answered the prayers of his disciples. Having easily believed the man, people began to repeat the name of their deity over and over again. At that moment, the whole truth came out, and people weren't completely foolish when they recognized God as an elite-level zombie. Realizing that the deception had been revealed, the man still tried to convince his would-be victims that they were not zombies at all. The messenger himself was not afraid of the monster, but simply turned to him and asked why the good boy did not listen to his father. But the infected did not respond in any way, but tried to stop those who were trying to escape. One of the former sectarians was unlucky, and he became the food of his god. James was still able to catch up with the monster and stabbed it in the back. However, the monster not only remained standing, but also became even more angry. Turning to his friends, the boy asked them to take all the people to a safe place so that they would not interfere with the battle. And then, no longer fearing for the lives of others, James entered the fight. After another failure, the guy thought that it would be nice to have at least some protection. And then he remembered that the system could exchange some items for rare armor. The choice fell on a pressure relief jacket. The thing immediately appeared on our hero. The infected immediately provided the opportunity to test the new item in combat. And it turned out that spending 20 attribute points was a good idea. Feeling that there were no more obstacles, James went on the attack. And it seemed that everything was about to end. But unexpectedly, the zombie used his trump card. The hero was thrown several meters away from the monster. The young man was surprised that this monster could also breathe fire. Seeing the infected spit flames again, James deduced that the cooldown between attacks was 2 seconds. The boy grabbed the sickle and rushed away to avoid danger. Realizing he had 2 seconds to spare, the young man attacked, a well-aimed blow to the monster's body. And then James realized that the zombie's weak spot was the neck. When the countdown was down to split seconds, risking himself, the young man attacked again. And this blow became decisive. Characteristics began to appear from the infected that fell to the floor. The hero couldn't believe how much he got from one zombie. After making sure that everything was over, James's friends approached him and asked if everything was okay. Eric reported that they had managed to capture the messenger who had been attracting people here since the end of the world to feed the zombies. The guy became stern and asked why all this was done. Unexpectedly for everyone, the man fell to his knees and began to sob loudly. He began to apologize to his son for making him suffer. It was a great surprise to James that the infected person was the man's son. The messenger said that the monster could not feed on dead people, but only on living ones. Enraged, Elizabeth shouted that the boy had been dead for a long time, and all these people had suffered in vain. Tired of the performance, James swung and killed the culprit of the death of many people. The guy hoped that after death the scoundrel would go to hell and answer for his actions. And then, leaving the building, the young man was glad that he had solved another problem. Regarding the escaped people, the guy promised to pass on the information to the colonel so that he could try to find them and take them back to him. After some time, the group returned to the temporary shelter. James immediately went to visit Teresa. Mary reported that the girl's condition was worsening and she urgently needed antibiotics. The guy still couldn't help on his own, since the medical chamber hadn't had time to cool down. The boys remembered the hospital they had heard about on the radio, where doctors treated patients for free. Realizing that they didn't have much of a choice, James decided to head there. The hospital was already very close. Having approached the entrance in their cars as close as possible, the comrades jumped out of the car and rushed inside the building. But they were met with fire. The boss ordered his men to duck, as an ambush awaited them here. 3 men emerged from behind cover and announced that the place was under their supervision. And the most unpleasant one promised that those who try to invade will die. Hoping for help, James asked strangers for antibiotics for the wounded woman. The impudent fellow grinned and said that he wouldn't do anything for free. Deciding not to argue with the man, the guy said that he was ready to share his things, which were in the car, with the bandits. However, the invaders didn't need just a couple of things. They wanted to take everything. They also demanded that the girls be left here. James asked strangers to be kinder, because that way they could save several lives. Not getting the hint, the bandit pointed his machine gun at the guy and said that he was not going to be kind. Our hero knew that this is how it would turn out, so he quickly took decisive action. The first blow went to the most impudent one. And then the weapons came into play. One swing and they have one less opponent. James glanced at his comrades and ordered them to join the fight. When it was all over, our group disposed of the bodies, moving them outside the hospital. And then they went to look for a doctor who was now vitally needed. The hospital building was huge. It felt like there was absolutely no one inside. The thought crept into James's head that they had come here in vain. But Mary reminded him that she could do something, and that she needed to find some medicine, and then take Teresa to the operating room. After spending dozens of tedious minutes in the operating room, the girl was able to remove the bullet from her friend. The bullet was deep, so it's no wonder it was so difficult to remove. Even though she was unconscious, the colonel's daughter began calling for James. I don't know anything about the progress of the operation. The guy was guarding the entrance to the ward. Suddenly, an infected person appeared ahead. The young man didn't understand where this monster could have come from in the hospital. But there was no time to think, and the guy, summoning a sickle, attacked. Suddenly, a cry for help came from somewhere. James turned around abruptly and asked if there were any people there. It turned out that a dead man had attacked a family of 3 nearby. The most frightened was the little girl who did not want her father to be eaten. Realizing that he couldn't do without his help, the young man attacked the enemy. When it was all over, he asked the strangers if everything was okay. Suddenly, all 3 fell to their knees in front of the guy, and then they began to thank him for saving their family. Feeling awkward, James asked the rescued men to get up, and then asked what they were doing there. The woman explained that they needed medicine for their sick mother, which could only be obtained at the hospital. The young man asked where these zombies came from. Having finished the conversation, the hero directed the family to the pharmacy, since he personally saw that there were a lot of medicines there, and also asked them not to forget about the danger. Having said goodbye to his new acquaintances, the guy returned to the ward. At that moment, Mary's head popped out of the door and announced that her friend could come inside. James offered to look after Teresa while her sister Elizabeth rested, and the girl happily agreed. Approaching the bed, the hero thought that the shot in the chest and memory loss were God's punishment for the impudent girl. Meanwhile, Mary, walking along the corridors, wondered whether the guy had forgotten about her loss of strength. Suddenly, hurried footsteps were heard from behind. Turning around, the girl saw a child flying towards her, begging for help. Bending over the baby, Mary asked what had happened. The girl, without any intention of calming down, announced that her parents had just been eaten by a zombie. The young woman asked where the danger was, to which the child pointed his finger down the corridor. Putting her hand on the girl's shoulder, Mary promised to take her to a safe place and then check what had happened. The only safe place was where their mini-group was. The girl explained that the baby's parents were eaten by a zombie inside the hospital, and leaving her inside could be dangerous. When Mary returned, she thought that relying only on a gun, in the absence of abilities, was not very pleasant. After passing through part of the building, she did not encounter a single dead person, which was strange. But then a room appeared from behind which voices were coming. Opening the door slightly, the girl slowly glanced around the room. Standing at the operating table was the man she and James had been trying to find some time ago. The doctor. Looking sternly at the guest, the man asked why she was here. Pointing a gun at the stranger, Mary demanded that he remove the sheet from the man lying on the couch. The doctor explained that there were 9 nearly dead zombies lying here, which he had brought for examination. Covering her nose, the girl said it was disgusting. As she turned around, she advised the man to touch the dead less often. Suddenly, the man jumped towards the beauty. However, Mary noticed this in time and opened fire on him. But he was able to dodge the bullets with one dexterous, inhuman movement. And then, having reached the girl, he pressed her to the floor. The doctor's eyes widened and he declared that the caught one looked delicious. The captive tried to escape from the grip, but realized that the madman was too strong. Mary peacefully asked the doctor to get off her. However, in response, the pervert stated that he let that girl go, and it was worth it, because she brought such an appetizing victim. Sister Elizabeth got tired of listening to the stranger and had to hit him between the legs, but he didn't react to this and warned that he was going to eat the one he caught. At this moment, an unforeseen circumstance intervened in the pervert's plans. James burst into the room and attacked the madman. The doctor avoided the question and asked with displeasure what this man was doing there. Our hero reported that he came running to the sound of gunshots and saw a zombie disguised as a human. The guy really had high monster stats and they looked scary. And a moment later, the doctor stopped hiding and began to address. And now a huge monster stands in front of the guys. As he prepared to jump, the former man said that today was the day James died. But the guy ignored the infected man's words, as his brain had not yet recovered from the fact that a half-breed of a zombie and a human stood before him. Feeling the attentive gaze on himself, the monster, showing off, declared that his body was amazing. He said that after work he was busy fusing the genes of a zombie and a lion, and became a hybrid zombie. And thanks to radium, the doctor was able to attract a constant flow of people to the hospital on whom he could experiment, and some of whom he could even feed on. The man believed that those who fell for the ad had only themselves to blame, since in a world with limited resources, medicine cannot be free. James's gaze fell on the jacket that was lying on the floor. He recognized the item as the one that the baby's father had been wearing just recently. Taking a couple of steps towards the hybrid, the guy asked where the girl's family was now. The monster grinned and said that he had eaten them. And at that moment, our hero launched an attack. However, the sickle did no damage, and he realized that the zombie's skin was too thick. Realizing that things were not going well, Mary began shooting at the enemy. However, this didn't work for him either. For a moment, the boys felt hopeless. The former doctor decided to start with the weaker victim and rush towards her. But James jumped forward and demanded that the monster fight him. It was hard to withstand the hybrid's blow, but the young man was able to do this, and also to strike back. Turning around, he ordered Mary to run for help. But the giant did not agree with this, and he declared that no one would get out of here. And then, running around James, he rushed towards the beauty. It seemed like the girl was about to be eaten by a zombie. However, this was contrary to our hero's plans. For his own safety, the protagonist activated the iron bones, and the doctor, who was already anticipating his victory, only achieved the result of breaking his teeth on a person. Fearing for her comrade, Mary still did not run for help. Taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, the guy turned around and ordered the girl to go to a safe place. This time she decided not to slow down and ran for help. James understood that the enemy must have weak points, and they needed to be found as quickly as possible. Activating the skill helped in finding the desired point. The guy realized that he needed to aim at the place hidden under the hair. Swing of the sickle. And the mutant is defeated. The giant gave a lot of spiritual attributes, which could not but please. But then the system notified James that he had received a new title for the end of the world. A new suit was also received, which was immune to fire attacks, corrosion protection, and a 20% damage reduction. A notification has arrived that the hero can now open the supply box. It was the same chest that James had picked up last time but had been unable to open. Curiosity was tearing the guy apart from the inside, and not in vain at all. I received a notification that the medical cabin's functions have been updated, and the ability to create a recovery potion has become available. At that moment, the guys burst into the office and were surprised to find the defeated monster. James ordered his friends to return to the van while he went to get Teresa. Entering his friend's room, the young man first decided to use the medical chamber. He ordered the ability to begin diagnosing the girl. The machine reported detecting memory lapses. As if sensing that she was being studied, Teresa coughed, and the camera reported the start of restoration. And James began to have hope that all this would have a successful outcome. 30 minutes later, the girl opened her eyes. Sitting up in bed, she asked what James was doing there. She became worried and asked what he was doing there and where her father was. The friends saw that the boys had finally come outside. They immediately moved towards the latecomers. Mary wondered how Teresa could recover so quickly. The guy claimed that he restored his girlfriend's memory and body, but he can't say yet how he did it. And then James saw a little girl whose parents had recently died. She looked very upset, which wasn't surprising at all. Crouching down in front of the child, the hero promised that he would help her avenge her parents. Not believing that anyone could help, the girl burst into tears. But James only hugged her, and then asked her to let go of the situation and move forward. Holding the girl, the hero turned to his friends and said that it was time for them to go get his parents, a distant suburb of James's hometown. After getting out of the car, the guy asked his friends to stay in the car while he looked around. A couple of minutes later, the main character was already in his house, but it was as if the parents had never been here. Once outside, James reported that there was no one inside, and that they should look for clues related to their disappearance. The group decided to split up and look for something separately. While moving along the rooftops, the guy heard cries for help. Looking down, the hero saw a gang of villains accosting a young girl. They threatened the zombie captive if she tried to escape now. And once again, the hero decided to act as a savior. It was not difficult for James to disperse the insolent people. Looking at the stranger with fear, the girl thanked the guy for his help. The young man showed a photograph of his parents and asked whether the bandit's victim had seen them, to which he received a negative answer. This upset the guy, as he had been relying on the local residents' knowledge. But then the girl said that she knew where to find those who lived here. Hope was revived in James's soul, and he turned back. The stranger said that a group of people had recently arrived here and taken all the survivors from the area. It turned out that people had occupied the Herbal Garden Hotel on the seashore and established their headquarters in its center. The guy immediately set off on his way. Eric and Tobias were standing outside the hotel, looking at an advertisement with a beauty. The man asked the fat man if the boss's parents might be there. As if enchanted, Eric suggested going inside and examining everything inside. Suddenly, something landed behind the former bandits. In the next moment, the men were captured. Looking up, they saw a woman. Feeling the attention on herself, the stranger asked where the other two people had come from. Eric realized that another telepath was standing in front of them. He tried to convince the beauty that he would not harm her and asked her to let him go. But the woman said that she didn't have enough slaves, and 2 strong men would be perfect for the role. And then, using her skills, the bandit knocked our heroes unconscious. Suddenly, people in black appeared behind her, immediately grabbed the guys and carried them away somewhere. Barn. 2 people looked closely at the newcomers and wondered what this meant for them. The woman said that they were safe here and that was good, but then people intervened in their conversation. The man demanded that the old people pay 5 willow coins. Ethan Garden said they've already paid for this week, but this only angered the bandit, and he shouted that he was demanding money for last week. A young girl stood up to defend the old man and asked the villain to stop torturing people. The beauty promised that she would pay for the old people from her own money. The man grinned and agreed to the proposal, and then he clarified that it would be necessary to add 1 more service to the money. But when the girl refused him, the scoundrel lost his temper and hit her in the face. Meanwhile, Eric and Tobias began to come to their senses. The boys couldn't figure out where they were. The defender fell to the ground, and the couple, fearing for her life, promised to pay the coins themselves. Amelia turned to Olivia and said that she was fine, and then said that if James had been there, everything would have been different. Hearing the familiar name, the impudent guy laughed and said that the fat kid couldn't do anything. And then the 2 captives realized that the boss's parents were in front of them. The bandit approached the girl and grabbed her tightly by the hair. Eric couldn't stand this and demanded that they stop bullying the weaker sex. The pervert ordered his guards to teach the arrogant newcomer a lesson. Taking advantage of the fact that the men were tied up and unable to fight back, local strongmen began to beat them. Mr. Parker whispered that if the fire unicorn were with him, he would smash everything here to pieces. At this, the boy glanced at the poster and remembered how he had always dreamed of taking his parents here and giving them the opportunity to relax. Suddenly a loud sound caught his attention. The boys, so as not to give themselves away, carefully peeked out from around the corner. It turned out that a battle with a mutant was taking place next to them. This zombie was terrifying because it looked incredibly strong and powerful. James, thanks to his abilities, saw the characteristics of the dead man and realized that it would not be easy. But then a stranger ran towards them. He muttered something about wanting to find a safe place and not get involved in the battle. Unexpectedly, an obstacle appeared in the coward's path. Mary rushed towards the stranger and grabbed him so that he would not have a chance to escape. And then James came up to him and showed him a photo of his parents, asking where they were being kept. The boy pointed his finger back in fear and said that all the slaves were kept in a barn. The hero asked how many people were guarding the slaves. The gang member said that he doesn't guard many people because they are not important. James thanked the stranger for his answer and then sent him off to rest. Young people decided to take advantage of the chaos to save people. Meanwhile, the bandit continued to taunt Amelia, convincing her that he could get any woman. Hoping for the impudent man's conscience, the girl tearfully begged him to let her go. But the man said that he was in no way inferior to James, and as soon as he showed up here, he would immediately kill him. These were the last words that the main character heard. In a moment, the guy stands in front of his girlfriend's offender. The bandit couldn't believe that the same fat man James Garden was standing in front of him. The young man demanded that the pervert take his hands off Amelia. Hearing a painfully familiar voice, the beauty turned around with disbelief. She immediately shouted to her old friend that his parents were eagerly awaiting their son's return. And then the self-confident guy decided to show everything he was capable of. However, his abilities did not last long. Amelia looked at what was happening with shock, because she did not expect such courage from James. Having made sure that the enemy had been thrown back, the guy immediately began to help the girl get to her feet. Smiling, the beauty said that the hero's parents were in the barn and called him to follow her. And now the moment of meeting has come. An old couple looked at their alive and healthy son. They immediately came closer, wanting to make sure that their eyes were not deceiving them. The mother immediately asked why the baby had lost so much weight, to which she responded that he was interested in a healthy lifestyle. Realizing that his parents were safe, James asked them to follow him. But the fugitives were spotted on their way out. A group of security guards rushed to intercept them. However, the battle was not destined to happen. Mary, who was sitting behind the wheel, ordered everyone to jump into the car. Once the parents and Amelia were in the car, James closed the door behind them and asked them to drive to a safe place. He himself decided not to leave his pursuers on his tail, but to deal with them immediately. But it turned out that the enemy was not just a person, but another telepath. The enemy's body was quite hard, but his durability is nothing compared to James.